Well, hello, everyone. Well, everyone on YouTube and Odyssey. Oh, Rockman just went live. I was having a little bit of trouble for a second there, setting up the stream on Rockfin, but it looks like we're good to go there. We're good to go on Rumble. We're good to go on Odyssey, and I think we might even be good to go on Getter. Guys, welcome to Spy Stream, our second spy stream in a row. We very rarely have more than one spy stream in a week, but I think that's pretty great. Now, tonight, we are going to be doing something a little bit different. Hang on one second. Just going to do something I should have done before I started. Okay, one second. This is what happens when we do spy stream. You never know what's going to happen. You never know what's going to happen on spy stream. All right. So I've got that all set up and ready to go. Okay. So what we're doing tonight, Spy Stream is a special stream that we do whenever we have an opportunity to come together to watch a live woke training. Now, we did Spy Stream last night. We will talk about last night's Spy Stream in a second because, oh my God, we have our hero from Spy Stream last night, Melanie, in the chat. Melanie, welcome. We salute you again. We also salute Alexandra, another hero from Spy Stream last night. And we'll talk about why both Melanie and Alexandra are here. Essentially, they're heroes because they sussed us out last night. Well, they didn't suss us out. I announced it on Twitter and on Substack that we were going to be streaming last night. So I wasn't exactly being covert about it because I like to antagonize the Vermont Commission on Human Rights. And after we announced that we were going to be streaming them live, they decided to boot random people out of the webinar, and they got me. And then they refused to let anyone back in the webinar because I was signed up from like 4 or 5 different accounts, so I easily could have gotten back in if they had started letting people back in. But thankfully, Melanie was in the webinar and Alexandra was in the webinar, and so we got to know what they talked about anyway. So we salute you, ladies. Thank you for your service. Now tonight we're going to be doing something a little bit different. It's not the same organization as last night. Tonight we are going to be returning to the third in the 3-part series that we're doing called Elementary Teaching for Equity and Justice. Now, I have to give credit to Noreen and to Kathy. Even though Noreen and Kathleen and I probably wouldn't get along in real life, we probably wouldn't be best friends, but I do have to give them credit because they know we're streaming. They know exactly who I am. They know we're streaming the webinar tonight. And they decided to send me the link anyway. I was fully prepared in a 3-part series to only get through one spy stream. I was fully prepared not to be invited back for the full series. I mean, I'm honestly surprised. Like I've said, in the previous 2 streams we've done on this the last couple weeks, they absolutely could have figured out who I was and not invited me back and not sent me the link again, but they did. And so we have to be grateful for that. I'm gonna listen. I always try to be more generous with the woke than the woke are with me. I am grateful that we're being invited back. I am grateful that we're going to get to be able to see inside their webinar. Now, we aren't disruptive to their webinar. I don't cause chaos in the chat. I don't send people after them. I don't do any of those things. I just want to see exactly what they're saying. That's all I want. This is a citizen journalism endeavor. That's what this is. If journalists don't want to do their job and actually do journalism, then we will effing do it for them. That is the goal of Spy Stream, is to expose what is being taught in the schools when the teachers don't think you're listening. What is being taught in the schools? We want parents to see what's being taught in the schools. We want them to be able to make the best informed decision that they can. So I do know that they're probably going to try to make the request not to record this tonight. Sadly, when I signed up and paid them for the webinar, I didn't agree not to record it and stream it on YouTube. So I'm sure they're going to put some terms and conditions in there next time. But they didn't this time, so we got in under the wire. And listen, again, I'm going to be more fair than I think than either Katie and Noreen would be to me. I actually don't think this series has been like the worst thing I've ever watched. Listen, I watch this stuff all the time. Don't get me wrong, I'm enjoying it, but like, and we're gonna have fun with it because that's what we do on Spy Stream. But I honestly do not believe that this is actually the worst woke training I've ever seen. I honestly think they have some good ideas. I think they make some good points. I think that both of them are probably doing what they're doing because they think that's what they need to do to be a good person. I happen to disagree with that. But I think they also have a fundamentally deranged perspective about who people like us are and what we believe. And I think they're teaching children to be activists, and I don't like that at all. So today we are going to be watching the third in three. It's the third series in 3 weeks. And let me just make this a little bit bigger so we can read it. We have watched the previous two on Spy Stream. You're welcome to go back and watch them. What we're going to be watching tonight, I feel like this is like our moment. I feel this webinar is made for us. I actually feel like we're doing them a giant favor by streaming this because we're adding a whole new dimension to this webinar because tonight they are talking about elementary teaching amidst fear and panic. Teaching for equity and justice at the elementary level has always been complex, but it can be especially fraught right now in the face of organized and well-funded resistance. I am not well-funded. We'll talk about that more in a sec. There are, however, many strategies that can help protect and even build support for this work. So maybe they will actually convince us. We're going to give them the opportunity to convince us. Maybe they will. We're going to see. Kelly O'Daniel and with the super chat, yesterday was epic. Agree with you about this series. Yeah, like this series, like on a scale of 1 to 10, I think this is maybe like a 3 or a 4. It's really not that bad. And I think that we need to acknowledge when woke people are doing things that maybe aren't as bad as people might imagine they are. That's why I think it's so important to watch these trainings from start to finish, because when you only see clips of things, you're seeing it kind of pulled out of context. And I truly do not believe that most of these people are evil, bad people. I just think they haven't logically thought through to the conclusions of what they're doing. So that's what we're going to be watching. It's supposed to start in around about 20 minutes or so. We'll get logged into Zoom in a little bit. But before we do that, just a couple quick notes. Now, if you did not see yesterday's happy hour, or not happy hour, Spy Stream, holy hell. We attempted to stream a stream from the Vermont Commission on Human Rights in Outright Vermont featuring LGBTQ youth and education. They kicked us out, and then we proceeded to get a recording of them calling me a hate channel and summarily slandering all of you guys as well, calling you a hate channel. We did a little debrief last night with a guy that has way more expertise in matters of law than we do, and we actually feel pretty strongly that if we wanted to sue them for slander, we could actually sue them for slander. Also, we feel that they violated open meeting law, and they're not supposed to. Melanie, I think you look great. I love this picture. You look saucy. You're like, ooh, look what I just did. I just got the recording. I think you look like a queen, Melanie. That's what I think. No, but but the bare minimum. Listen, I'm not actually really interested in suing anyone, to be honest. I think that's a waste of time and a distraction. I am interested in FOIAing the shit out of these people, which we will be doing. We will be sending them mountains and mountains and mountains of FOIA requests. We're going to get all their emails. We're going to find out exactly what they were teaching in this webinar, because I'm sure they've been emailing about it, and being state employees, they're not allowed to delete their emails, and we're allowed to see what they are. So we're going to be working on that. Don't ever fear. But if you guys didn't get a chance to see the clip last night, I did post the clip. I actually used Melanie's upgraded audio recording that she was nice enough to send over, so the audio is a little bit better than what we heard last night, at least on the clip in this article. I don't know if it's the true of the clip I posted earlier, because I just use different stuff, okay? So make sure you check that out if you haven't already. Now, if you would like to support the work I'm doing, the very best way to do that is by becoming a supporter in my locals community. I am not a well-funded activist. I do not work for any organization. I do not work for any nonprofit. And there is a reason for that. I don't want anyone telling me what to do. I like being a lone wolf. I don't like people trying to censor my speech or having me grift basically to the audience that they want me to grift to. I like doing my own thing and I like coordinating with my unwoke army. We are a misfit ragtag group, bad news bears, and we are just citizen journalists and volunteers that are actively working to fight back against all of this woke insanity. You can get into the Unwoke Army by first becoming a supporter in my locals community. Now, this is not like a money making thing for me. It's not. It's not about that. When you join my locals community, you get access to our community Zooms, and the community Zooms is where you get to come and talk to me and other members in the community without being in the public eye. They are private, they are not recorded, and this is where I get a chance to know you. And I need to get a chance to know you before I let you into the Unwoke Army. And the reason for that is there is just way too much insanity in the anti-CRT space. There are way too many people that I think are just grifting on this entire thing that aren't actually interested in fighting back productively. And so I do vet the people in my Unwoke Army. Now, anyone can join. I don't really care who you are or what your deal is. You can join. I just need to talk to you first to make sure you're not a psycho. And that happens in my locals community. Now, you can become a supporter of my locals and get access to those community Zooms for $5 a month. You can do it for $50 a year, which gives you 2 months for free. You can make a one-time gift. All of these and all of the super chats we're going to get tonight go to support the work I'm doing, and I'm very grateful for it. But just so people know, this is not a money-making operation for me. If you really can't afford the $5, dude, I totally get it. Use the code UNWOKE in the monthly box, and that will get you a free month on locals, which gives you 8 chances to come to community Zooms for free to talk to me so I can confirm you're not a psycho, and then we can get you into the Unwoke Army Discord. Okay, so that's how that's going to work. It's really important. The vetting process is really important. We've got such a good thing going on right now in the Unwoke Army Discord. We like the community's so good. We're working together so well, and I'm not going to allow anyone to come into it that I feel would be disruptive. And if people get disruptive, they're going to be removed immediately because I ain't putting up with that bullshit. AD says, my FOIA request was responded to. We need to FOIA the HTC directly. I have the email. Excellent, AD. Thank you for that. AD is already sending in FOIA requests. Look at that. We're already hard at work. Lee says, open meeting laws are pretty easily violated. I'm sure they violated them, but really appreciate your work, especially these spy streams. Great work. Thank you, Lee, for that. I really, really appreciate it. Now, the other thing you can do if you want to support the work is by pre-ordering my book, Actively Unwoke. I just dropped a link in the chat on YouTube. We're going to pin that to the top of the chat. Actively Unwoke is the ultimate guide for fighting back against woke insanity in your life. The Unwoke Army in my Discord are actively implementing the tactics described in the book. We've already got our proof of concept. We already know that this stuff works. Spy Stream is part of my battle plan for fighting back against woke insanity. This is about being grassroots. Again, this is about being bad news bears. We are a ragtag group of misfits. We are not well funded. We are not organized in any organization that I just think is going to turn into a grifting operation inevitably. It provides you with a breakdown of the woke ideology in plain English so that you can understand what's going on. It provides you with ample case studies. I have case studies for fighting back against the woke in schools, fighting back against the woke in government, fighting back against the woke in corporations, and even trying to change culture. I've got a chapter on what to do if you get canceled. I've got a chapter on what to do for self-care because it is a little stressful to do this. And ultimately, with Actively Unwoke and my Unwoke Army, what I'm trying to do is make fighting back against the woke and changing our culture, turning this cultural revolution back. I'm trying to make it fun. Because the more fun we have, the more we're going to do it. The more we do it, the more wins we get. This is a battle of inches, folks. We're in it for the long game here. This is not going to be won overnight. This is not going to be won through legislation. This is going to be won by grassroots effort of normal people, just like all of you. And so this book is your roadmap. You can currently pre-order it on Amazon. You can also pre-order like Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, Simon & Schuster, all sorts of other options. Just Google around if you don't like Amazon. I'm sure you'll be able to find one, but it's currently available in hardcover. It is currently available in Kindle, and it is currently available in, excuse me, audio version to pre-order. I didn't read the audio version, thank God. I can't imagine anything more awkward than reading my own book, but it is available, and I'm sure the woman who read it did a wonderful job, and I can't wait to hear what they did with it. So it comes out on May 10th. Autograph copies are going to be available soon. I haven't gotten word that they're available yet, but they will be available soon. And I'm going to make another mechanism within my locals community for people to get autographed book plates that are sitting on my desk right here. And we're going to do that at some point as well. All right, guys. Now for Spy Stream, a few points. A few points. Let me just bring up my handy dandy little chart that I had yesterday. All right. Spy Stream is a live training. So we're going to be doing happy hour tomorrow, and I'll tell you more about the happy hour we're going to be watching tomorrow in a second. But tonight, we are watching a live training. When we do the happy hours on Fridays on my second channel, Actively Unwoke, we are not watching a live training. We're watching something that's been recorded. It might have been recorded very recently. It may have been recorded 10 years ago, but it is not live. Spy Stream is different. These are live trainings. I do not know what's going to happen. I do not know what they're going to say. I do not know if they're going to discover who we are and kick us out. We could be here for 5 minutes. We could be here for the rest of the night. I truly do not know what's going to happen. Number two, I will not do commentary over the training, but I will type my thoughts into the chat and I will display them on the screen. Okay, the reason I don't do commentary over the training is because I actually genuinely want to watch it. I want to see what they're teaching, and I want you, the public, to see what they're teaching as well. If you send in a super chat during the training, I will 100% display your super chat on the screen because that's my little thank you. I will not read it out loud because, again, I'm not going to read over the training. But I also might display just normal chatted in comments on the screen if I think that they're really good or have a good point or things like that. And that's going to be purely based on my discretion. Last thing that's not on this, but that I do want to mention, I don't think this will be an issue tonight, but it would have been an issue last night, and it's been an issue intermittently before. If there are any children involved in the stream, and by children I mean anyone under 18, I do not count a 16-year-old to be of age. I don't care what the Democrats say or what they want to lower the voting age to. We do not attack children in these streams, okay? We don't do it. Kids are victims of this just like everyone else. And I don't care if they're in high school, their brain is not fully developed. They have been in a world their entire lives where this is what they've been fed. They are victims of this ideology. They are not propagators of it. So we do not attack underage people in the chat. Please be mindful of that. And this, quite frankly, we saw the reason why last night. Last night, the Vermont Human Rights Commission and Outright Vermont slandered all of us as a hate channel. And they don't have a leg to stand on with that. They have no leg to stand on at all because there was no hateful comment made in my chat. There were no hateful comments at all. There were no hateful comments about kids. There were no hateful comments about gay kids. There were no hateful comments about trans kids or binary kids. We do not attack kids on this stream or on this channel ever. I have beaten that dead horse. And the reason we do that is because everything you say in the chat is public and it can be used against us. And I'm not attacking kids anyway because I don't think it is the correct thing to do. All right. Now we've got about 13 minutes before we're going to get started. We had a couple other orders of business just to kill time before then. Now, like I mentioned, we do have a happy hour coming up tomorrow. Happy hour is on my second channel, youtube.com/activelyunwoke. And tomorrow we are going to be watching a training that just took place yesterday. We could have done Spy Stream for this too, and I just didn't think of it. To be honest, I was distracted with other things yesterday. But this training took place yesterday. It is a training sponsored by the U.S. Department of Education, and it's called Supporting Transgender and Non-Binary Students in K through 12 Schools. So this was put on by the government. By the government. The government. And so we're going to be seeing exactly what Joe Biden's administration and Joe Biden's Department of Education is teaching people about trans and non-binary students in K through 12 schools and what schools should be doing to help and support them. That will be tomorrow at 5 p.m. on my second channel, Actively Unwoke. It will not be on my main one. It will be on my second one. Brian said, are we going to get banned again? I don't think so. They know we're streaming and they sent me the link. So I hope we're not going to get banned. Contrary to what our presenters said last week, I am acting in good faith. I just want to see what they're saying. And they sent me the link, man. They could have figured out who I was and not sent me the link. They know I'm streaming. And so it is what it is. We're gonna get as much as we can. We're gonna enjoy what we can. And we'll see what they do. But I hope you guys will join me at 5 p.m. tomorrow for happy hour on Actively Unwoke. And make sure you subscribe over there. Make sure you mount the like button over here on my main channel. And please double check and make sure you are subscribed on my main channel as well. All right. Last order of business. I'm going to pour a beer. I drink during happy hour, but it's like 6, it's almost 7 o'clock. It's time for a beer. Does anyone want a beer? Is everyone good? Everyone got a drink? All right. So I have my beers left over from yesterday. And I'm going to ask you guys which one you want me to pour. We have a Java Mocha Chip Imperial Oatmeal Stout. We have our Imperial Whippy Pie Stout. I had this one last week. It was all right. We've got this one, which is a milk stout brewed with coffee. And we have this one, which is hot sex and something that I can't read because I can't quite see it. Hot sex and platter? Is that what that says? I don't know. It's strawberry chocolate something or other. It is a imperial stout with chocolate and strawberries. Which one should I go for? Does anyone have an opinion? I have no opinion. Let's see. Goth Goblin wants chocolate strawberries. Oh, hot sex on a platter. That's probably what. Okay, everyone's saying I should have hot sex. You guys are my people. You guys are my people. I know a queen of England or queen from England that would have accused me of sexual harassment even for drinking this beer, hot sex on a platter. Brian totally would, but I'm at work until 000. Okay, sorry, Brian. But I can enjoy. I will enjoy a beer on your behalf. Okay, apparently we're definitely going with the chocolate covered strawberries, hot sex on a platter. All right, fine. Just as long as no one from England accuses me of sexual harassment in the course of drinking of this stream or the course of me drinking this beer. That'd be pretty great. The donut beer, Lady Hawk says the donut beer I had yesterday sounded divine. I don't know. It was a little disappointing. No shade to Pipe Brewing or the donut people, but it was a little disappointing. Oh my God. Oh God. Look at that. Oh God. I can smell the strawberry already. Holy hell. I can already smell it. Look at the head on that. I haven't even poured the whole beer in yet. Yeah, look at that. That's like a 4 or 5 finger head right there. I can seriously smell the strawberries like I've got a full thing of strawberries sitting right next to me. That's how. Oh my goodness. All right, we're just gonna let that settle for a second. We got about 8 minutes left. How you guys doing? You having a good day? No, I'm not a bartender. I know how to pour beer proper. Proper. I wish there was a way where I could better articulate the how each beer tastes when I'm doing these things. I love craft beer. I love sharing with craft beer. I love talking about craft beer. So thank you guys for indulging me on that. Let's see. Let's see how it is. Cheers, everyone. Happy Thursday. We're almost there. Almost through another week. I can taste the strawberry. I really can. Oftentimes with stouts, when they have like fruity things in them, I mostly taste like coffee or something. But I can definitely taste the strawberry. That's really great. I don't think I'm gonna get booted. They know I'm streaming. This isn't like last night. They announced on their webinar last week. They knew I was streaming. Then and one of the ladies blocked me on Twitter. They know I'm streaming. Like, they invited me back. So the only thing I can surmise from that is that they want me to be streaming. I don't know. So we're gonna see. If I get booted, I get booted. It is what it is. All right. Let me get situated. Let me get situated. There's a lot of people that go to these webinars too. You can tell last week they were like, it was a very young audience, I think. Who was here last night for Spy Stream? Anyone here? What a trip that was. I was not expecting to be slandered. Can I just say, I was not expecting to be slandered last night. I really wasn't. For those who were, let me actually just, you know what I'm going to do? Since we got a little time, why don't I just bring up the clip that I made with the sound so we can hear what happened last night, just as like a nice little interlude until they let us in. Chrome tab, share audio. And now we can go to the Substack article. I made a whole clip. I put captions and everything. All right. Here's what happened last night in case you missed it on Spy Stream. This is now Melanie, our hero, what she stayed in and she recorded what happened. She recorded what they said about us, and here it is.
That anyone else I want to say that at the top of our event, because there may be folks here streaming a live stream to folks who don't share those views, to folks who would question the existence and the rightness of respect, safety, and dignity for queer and trans youth. And though we are trying to control whether or not it gets live streamed, we can't do that and still hold this event. But I want to let you know that at the top of this event, the 3 facilitators and Amanda Garces from the HRC, we decided that we wanted to have this event, even though we have not consented to having this live streamed, nor have we consented to the vitriol and hate that we're expecting to be posted on those YouTube channels in response to our truth and the dignity and respect that is deserved to LGBTQ plus youth. We can't control that, but we want to create an opportunity for folks to be in choice about staying on this call. If this feels like a space that you don't feel like you can be in, please be in choice. And there's many places and ways that you can learn about these issues. But we also want to let folks know that if you're in the space and you're holding those views, that your questioning of that reality is not welcome here. So we're going to try to hold a space that uplifts and affirms the dignity of queer and trans youth and queer and trans people. Knowing that this may be live streamed right now on channels on YouTube where folks are expressing hate, we wanted to take this opportunity to not ignore that. And we're going to have an opportunity to for folks right now to move into small groups, to introduce themselves, to share why they're here, and to notice if you have anything in this conversation, you're like, wow, I came to learn about LGBTQIA inclusion from schools, but instead, I'm confronted with the reality that this workshop
good to be with everyone tonight. Hello.
Is being live streamed on a hate channel. So I'm weird.
So I encourage everyone to go back and check out the whole stream. It looks like they're getting ready to get started with the webinar tonight. We're in. They didn't kick us out. That's good. That's good. Brian says, "Gay parent here, and I'm totally against these subjects being taught to young children. It's my
trying
job,
to get
not
family
theirs."
pictures before treatments start. We realized we didn't have a family picture for everybody.
I don't know if you guys can you guys hear the webinar already? You probably should
get
be
that
able
going.
to,
You look
because
nice
it's
too.
through my
Hey.
sound.
Thank you. I'm wearing my conference outfit still. So
How did it go?
They're just talking about
good. I'll have to fill you in on it later. There's some interesting things, but
as a reminder,
overall
guys,
really
I
well.
will display all super chats once
I
we
can't
get
wait to hear about
started,
it.
but I won't read them out loud. As a government employee, you don't need fucking consent.
Okay.
The last 2 times I've done Zoom with you, you've had this weird black box on the bottom left corner of your screen. Do you know what that is?
She's covering
No
up my
idea.
name.
That's so strange. Like, am I touching it now?
On the other side. Yeah, like right there.
Nothing. I see nothing.
Bizarre.
I wonder if it wasn't like does it look, is it like an exact square?
No, it's like really a little rectangle that has been added because it's on top of your outfit. I don't know. That's weird.
Very strange. I imagine one of my kids was fussing with my settings, and maybe now there's something. You know how late to the game I am on anything technological.
I know. Hey, you know what? I think last time we did not close caption.
Oh, shoot. Okay.
Yeah, let's make sure we do that today. But I cannot help you with that because I don't know how to do that.
I've got it. I do actually know how to do that. Ta-da.
Perfect.
Oh, well, almost perfect. I said ta-da, not today. Okay. It's kind of amazing that I can do that live.
Sound good, guys?
Right.
Welcome, everybody. I'm going to start sharing.
Hi,
screen.
Katie. Hi, Noreen. It's good to see you guys again. Thank you for letting me come back. I actually do mean that. Don't show us your desktop. You're live on the internet right now. Don't do it. Don't show us your desktop. Don't do it. It's your fault if you do. You knew we were streaming.
There we go.
All right.
Can you hear too much background noise? Is it okay?
Just a little bit, but it's not distracting.
Okay.
There's a sick part of me that actually kind of wants to be like nice to these people because I actually don't think they're like that bad.
To do that. I say that and then
and
I'm
part
like,
of me is like, can't we just be friends and like talk it out and be reasonable
remember
people?
how I did it?
But they're like, no, bitch, you streamed us on the internet. Sorry. Civil disobedience. We're just doing collective activism.
Thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate that a lot. We were all able to be together tonight, which was really great.
They hid the
so
chat.
That's why I'm coming to you from
they
a different
hid
spot.
the chat.
Hopefully
We can't see the chat anymore. Damn it. They hid the chat from us this time. They did.
Mold. Yeah, I also found out I have mold in my office that I work out of. So
all right,
everything is
fine.
a disaster.
The chat wasn't really that eventful last time anyway.
When it rains, it pours, but I got galoshes.
You'll make it through.
Here. Yep. We can do it.
Yeah. They aren't bad.
Maybe just give like another.
They're misled.
That's a very.
That's the best sound to hear.
Well, this is not a state agency.
Crying,
they're not a state agency. They're like a private company that I paid for the training.
Lots of very loving.
That's okay. We don't need the chat
here tonight.
We hope you get your mold mitigated, Katie.
I want to get this pulled up.
We don't want you to get sick.
Welcome, everybody.
Hi.
Happy you could all be here tonight.
Okay,
this is the last session. These went fast, these 3 weeks, for sure. We'll have to do more. We'll have to do other ones. Hello.
Hi, everyone. If you want to send a message to the group, make sure that you click the little setting that says to everyone, because I think the last couple of messages have just gone to host and panelists, so not everyone can see that. So make sure you're sending it to the right audience. All righty. Should we go ahead and get started?
I think we should.
Folks will have the recording link. They can always access anything they missed. So welcome to session 3 of Elementary Teaching for Equity and Justice. Today's session is about elementary teaching amidst fear and panic. And we are going to spend quite a bit of time thinking about the current moment politically, what that means for teachers, who is responsible for some of the things that are making teaching difficult right now, how to protect yourself, things that you can do to not just get through, but to do justice by your kids and make sure that they are getting the things that you need and that the questions that they have are questions that you are able to answer confidently in the classroom. So just a quick reminder of what we do when we're in this space. Please feel free to use the chat box to connect with each other and share resources. If you are not comfortable potentially with your name being made public, you may want to adjust that in the settings. If you have questions for us, please put them in the Q&A box rather than the chat. The last 2 sessions, folks have had a lot to say and people are really connecting and making wonderful recommendations in the chat, and that's wonderful. But if you have a question for us, it is most easiest for us to track those if you put them directly into the Q&A. That way we make sure that we either address them in writing, or if we know that we're going to get to them during the talk, we'll make sure that we attend to that, or we can get to them at the end. And we do want to make sure that we have a good chunk of time at the end of today's session to get to those questions. If you want us to see them, please put them in the Q&A rather than the chat. And you will get the link for tonight's session tomorrow, as we've done for the last 2 weeks. And once again, taking screenshots, totally fine, but please no other recording. You will get the link tomorrow.
Great. Okay. So I think this is so, when we're thinking about what exactly is happening, probably most people have some kind of experience in their community. I work with schools all over the country, outside of the United States. We know we have some folks coming from other countries, and there's not a district or a school I'm working with that isn't worried about or experiencing some of the things that we're going to talk about tonight. Do you want to talk through some of these headlines here?
Okay, I totally thought you were doing this one. Okay.
Oh, I can do it. No, I can do it.
Okay, please do, because you know the order that they appear.
Yeah, it's totally fine. So when we think about the last couple of years, that things have, there's a lot of political polarization. We know that things have ratcheted up and gotten very intense at school board meetings and city council meetings, but especially around the curriculum and what's happening in public schools, but not just public schools, private schools too have been the targets of a lot of questions, concerns, some of them, reasonable and well-founded, and some of them in really bad faith and based on really horrible misinformation. And I would say that that's true about so much of the CRT critiques and concerns. That is like a whole other series of webinars to get into what CRT actually is, the role that it plays in legal theory, how that's influenced educational research, the degree to which, if at all, it exists in K-12 schools, why that's become such a hot talking point right now. But it's just enough to say that this is part of what's going on in schools. Even things that like election results that in years past have been not controversial to teach about. You might have seen this viral video a parent took of them calling their child's teacher and being very upset that teacher had them coloring in electoral college results to teach them about civics and the way that elections work, and was very upset that this was not true information and did not believe that the election was fairly called, and that really had a lot of concerns about it. So these are just examples of things that have been happening the last couple of years. Again, we probably don't have to tell you about very much of this. There's also a lot of legislation at the state level. I live in Iowa, and we have one of the divisive concepts bills that says it is illegal to require students or teachers to learn about systemic racism and sexism, or to be taught that that's foundational to our state's history or to United States history. There are bills that are coming out at an incredibly terrifying, rapid pace around legislating against trans children in schools or curriculum that addresses LGBTQ issues. Florida in particular, but certainly not just Florida, Maureen's home state of Texas, all over the country and in other parts of the world too. So just a lot. It feels like a fire hydrant that you're trying to drink out of right now. And so we don't want to dismiss that these are very real and present, intense contexts that you all are trying to teach in, especially because we're coming off of 2 years in a pandemic, that people are already afraid and stressed out anyway, and having to just shift gears. And there's just so much that has drained and exhausted teachers, and then this just piles on top of it. That being said, we also want to stress that this is not new. These forces that are organizing and showing up at school board meetings, these are the descendants of folks that every generation have done their best to fight against desegregation of schools, to try to produce narratives about the Civil War, like the Daughters of the Confederacy did right after the Civil War, to influence the curriculum to teach that the war was really the lost cause and that these were heroes and they were rebels against a tyrant, and this narrative that completely dismissed the realities of the war that just happened. These are very old forces. And this quote from James Baldwin from 1963 in a talk he gave to teachers, James Baldwin being an incredible novelist and activist, organizer. I always read this to myself at the beginning of each school year because it's such a good reminder that these things aren't new. He says, let's begin by saying that we are living through a very dangerous time. Everyone in this room is in one way or another aware of that. To any citizen of this country who figures himself as responsible, particularly those of you who deal with the minds and hearts of young people, must be prepared to go for broke. Or to put it another way, you must understand that in the attempt to correct so many generations of bad faith and cruelty, when it is operating not only in the classroom, but in society, you will meet the most fantastic, the most brutal, and the most determined resistance. There's no point in pretending that this won't happen. Educators from generations beyond us, and we'll talk about this more at the end of our session tonight, have risked a lot. They have endured a lot. They have imagined and dreamed of something better, and they've fought for that, and they've worked for that. And we have generations of research behind us as professionals to support the work that we're doing. So we are part of a very, very long tradition. These forces are old. The backlash against anti-racist work in schools is very, very old. It's also very powerful. But these efforts to make sure that schooling is equitable for kids and is a place where kids can be loved and supported and learn, those efforts are old too. And so it's just about acknowledging that work and keeping the ball moving forward to the next generation. And speaking of the next generation, Rethinking Schools had a great issue out this summer about a lot of these issues happening in schools and how teachers are responding. And a 5th grade teacher in my home state, who I admire a great deal, said in an interview, "Let me be clear." And this was in response to Iowa passing the legislation that it is divisive to teach that Iowa is fundamentally racist, which this is actually an area of expertise for me, is laughably inaccurate, right? If you know anything about the history of the state, I love my state, I love where I'm from, and it is deeply fundamentally racist in its systems and structures, right? Like both of those things can be true. And so she's saying, let me be clear, I'm going to keep doing what I do because that's what I do. I'm going to teach the truth. As Asada Shakur said, I have nothing to lose but my chains. So there are teachers that are being incredibly courageous. And I have to say, especially teachers of color and teachers with minoritized or marginalized identities who are refusing to comply with laws that are demanding that they hurt children. They're refusing to, sometimes outright, sometimes they're finding creative ways to do it, sometimes they're organizing. We'll talk more about different ways that they're doing it, but for them, this is the utmost way to be a professional. Noreen teases me that I talk about educational malpractice a lot, that to do harm to kids is to engage in educational malpractice. And we are experts. Noreen and I have PhDs, but there are teachers who've taught for years and years who have done a lot of advanced coursework. This is an incredibly skilled profession that you need a lot of knowledge and you need a lot of practice to do these things well. You have expertise, you are professionals. And there's a definition of professionalism that we really appreciate that was also written about a few years ago in Rethinking Schools about work teachers were doing in New Mexico. And these scholars and educators, classroom teachers worked together to write this beautiful piece about their idea of professionalism. And they define professionalism as activism, not compliance, not obedience with laws or policies or rules that we know are harming kids and are making it harder for kids to learn and harder for kids to be who they are in classrooms. So they say professionalism for them is activism, recognizes that we enter our role as teachers in a democratic society with a set of commitments and responsibilities to advocate for children and for ourselves as educators. That means we must speak against policies and leadership decisions that undermine our work and devalue our expertise about children and learning. And I keep thinking about, other professions that have to do this as well. Medical professionals who have to advocate for more funding or for better public health information, right? Like we have knowledge and expertise that we can use on behalf of families and students, and that we need to do that. That's actually what we're called to do that as professionals. They note that it's characterized by action, not just words, but actions to defend and promote meaningful instruction and collaboration among teachers, action to inform families about current reform initiatives and their rights, and actions even sometimes as protesters against unsound policies that compromise the integrity of teaching and learning in our public schools. This is a great read. We definitely recommend it. Anything else, Marina, about that before we move on?
I mean, I think, Katie, you hit on an important point that we didn't prepare to get into, but I think it's important that, and in teacher education research, we spend a lot of time around this idea that we call the apprenticeship of observation. Mm-hmm. That because everyone, for the most part, most people have gone through K through 12 schooling, folks often think that they understand how school works, that whatever they learned in school is what everyone should learn because they turned out just fine. And nothing needs to be changed and everything should be done exactly the way they experienced it. But that doesn't mean that you have expertise in terms of what curriculum needs to look like, how instruction should go, what is developmentally appropriate for children, how we attend to things in the contemporary world that we live in now, not the world that parents and guardians grew up in 20, 30, 40 years ago. And so I think that is one of the biggest challenges that teachers face because everyone went to school And therefore, a lot of people who have no educational expertise feel like they can authoritatively speak about schooling and education, even though they have zero training in it. They know nothing about the research, but based on their personal experience as a student, they can speak about what should and should not be happening in schools. And so this is a long conversation that folks have been having. I think when Schulman wrote about that was what, in like the 70s or something?
70s.
That's a long time ago. But we're still having these conversations, and a lot of the pushback that Katie kind of briefly went through is tied to these ideas that educators who are degreed and credentialed professionals don't know as much as caretakers and families do. So this is a tension that we're still wrestling with, but it's also a tension that's always existed. And it's something that sometimes we just need to remind people, you are experienced teachers. You have gone through training for this. You get regular professional development to maintain your credentials. You know what you are doing. And when you don't know what you're doing, you have particular professional developments with which you engage to get better. The average person does not inherently know everything there is to know about schooling just because they went through it. And sometimes it's important to just name that and remind ourselves of the expertise that you all have as educators, because a lot of times, especially right now, it's questioned frequently and with a lack of, with frankly, just a lack of respect for what it is that you all do.
Especially when we think about people who are in positions of power that are making rules that constrain and inform what teachers can do. When we look at school boards, there's no qualifications. You don't have to have you don't have to have been a licensed teacher. You don't have to have an education degree. When we think about state legislatures, folks who even sit on the education subcommittees that develop these bills that can become laws. I know for our home state, the people with education degrees and backgrounds make up a fraction of those committees. And it's an even smaller number when you look at who's voting on these bills to have them become laws anyway. So this just means it's even more important for us to use our voice as professionals to advocate for the kinds of policies that we know are good for kids. We also want to be clear, both of us are parents. We have our own children. Every family, every caregiver, every parent is an expert on their kid and loves their kid, and we are partners in that education, right? So that is a really important relationship that we'll talk about a lot. But in terms of like the profession of education, that is a knowledge base that unless you have the extensive training and credentialing, it's complicated, right? It's hard to know. There are some common criticisms, some buckets of criticisms that we just want to note and point out. Some of you may be familiar with. So the first criticism of the work that we've been talking about the last couple of weeks is that this is really political. But what we say to that is that when you talk about political, that's different than partisan. Political means arguments or discussions that we have as humans when we're trying to live together and we're figuring out how to distribute resources and we have disagreements about that. That's what political means. So actually, all of education is always political because we have finite time. That's the scarcest resource a teacher ever has, right? And we have to make decisions about what we do with that scarce time with kids. We can't do it all. We can't teach it all. So there is no form of schooling that has ever not been political. There's no way to avoid that. Now that's different than partisan, which we'll talk about in just a minute. There's also the argument that this isn't appropriate for young children. But Noreen mentioned this, I think, last week, is that so many young children are already experiencing these issues themselves in their lives, whether it's death, whether it's racism, whether it's incarceration, whether it's war, whether it's violence of some kind, right? There's so much that kids are already experiencing at a very young age that they need support in learning more about. They might have misinformation about it. They might have concerns about it that learning can help, right? Or we want them to be aware of it so they can be empathetic and supportive to their peers who are going through that, right? So I wish this was inappropriate for young kids. I wish they weren't exposed to a lot of the inequities that are in the world, but they are, right? And some of the issues that we're talking about aren't even trauma-based, right? Some of it is simply cultural diversity and things that they're joyful about and excited about, and they want to share. They want to share about their moms, right? That they have two moms. They love their moms, and that's their family, and they want to share about it. That's beautiful, right? So it's not just trauma that we're talking about. Sometimes we're just talking about kids' faith that they're into, or their family structure that they love, right? Or their own identity that they're bringing to the class. Another critique that has really picked up steam is that this is divisive. We've talked a lot about, we started the webinar talking about our commitment to beloved community and to being in deep, loving community relationships with people of mutual concern and mutual obligation. That is the farthest thing from divisive, right? So when we think about what's divisive, curriculum that's racist, that's divisive, right? Curriculum that excludes kids and says you can't talk about your families here, that's divisive. It is the opposite of divisive to try to bring everyone in and learn about each other and bring everyone in to care about each other. And lastly, there's the critique that this is indoctrination, that we're wanting kids to like lockstep believe all the same things, or that we want them to, eventually vote for the same people. I honestly am completely uninterested in that. What I care about is that they can care about and respect each other, right? And that we'll get into this a little bit, but the kind of teaching that we're advocating for is deeply inquiry-based. It's all about questions, open questions that have lots of different possible answers. And so I'm less interested in a kid answering a question the exact same way as me, that they're just wrestling with these things and learning about them, right? So it's an education based on questions, can't be indoctrination, because it's opening up space for kids to come to answers that make sense to them, at least for certain sets of questions, right? So what we're talking about then today are ways, some of those critiques, there's not much you can do because people are hell-bent on having them, and reason, facts aren't going to make a difference, right? But we do also want to make sure that we are engaged in this work responsibly. Noreen and I have seen efforts to do this that aren't good, that we wouldn't stand behind, that we think lend credence to some of those critiques. And so we want to talk about tips for making sure that you aren't doing those things that critics say that you are, right? That you are being nonpartisan, that you are being age appropriate and thoughtful about that you are being deeply inclusive through a beloved community model, and that you are engaged in education and not in indoctrination. That is what we're super committed to, right? And it can go wrong, but it absolutely doesn't have to. And again, because it's a sophisticated skill set, you're professionals, we trust you to do that. All right. So with that, anything else before we start with the first tip, Noreen?
Yeah, let's get started.
Okay, let's do it. All right. So thinking about that, nonpartisan commitment, part of that is saying, look, we live in a society that is striving in the United States to be a democracy, and we are an incredibly diverse nation with territories and states and all sorts of people within those lands, right? So we have to think about explaining the work that we do as super necessary for living in a diverse democracy. If we lived in another kind of society, like an authoritarian, theocratic state, then a lot of what we've advocated for wouldn't make any sense, right? But we need young people who are going to become members of this society with lots of responsibilities, right? To vote, to participate, to be part of decision-making in their communities. So it's incredibly important that we make sure they're informed and have skill sets to be engaged citizens. That's what it's about. Walter Parker is a scholar out of the University of Washington who writes about this a lot in his decades of work. But this quote I really appreciate about why this is incumbent on educators, especially in public schools, but not just there. When aimed at democratic ends, he says, and supported by the proper democratic conditions, the interaction in schools can help children enter the social consciousness of puberty, which means public life, like being a public figure, and develop the habits of thinking and caring necessary for public life. They can learn the tolerance, the respect, the sense of justice, and the knack for forging public policy with others, whether one likes them or not. It's this idea of learning to be able to function with each other and to care for each other and communicate and deliberate across difference being really important about issues that matter, right? And that's what we've been talking about the last few weeks. So what this really calls us to do is to think about how we're engaging young children in opportunities to practice that skill of engaging in open questions in healthy, constructive ways. I'm about to share a few slides that I typically spend an entire day doing workshops on. So this is like bloop, the tip of a very big iceberg around this issue, but we thought it was worth sharing a little bit about it today. So often in today's media landscape, there's a sense that if something's controversial, it means that it is whatever anyone might have an opinion about, right? Anything that people have different opinions about. But that is pretty useless way to think about controversy, and actually leads us into some pretty gross places, if that's our definition. Like anybody who thinks anything about anything, and that's what it means to be controversial. So what sociologists, what scholars of democratic education and democratic theory, how they define controversy, and the way that educators we support define controversy, is multiple legitimate points of view about open questions that matter to people. Right? That these are the questions that are really important to wrestle with, and to teach kids how to practice wrestling with that. Even that definition itself has controversy embedded within it, because who gets to determine what constitutes a legitimate point of view? That word legitimate is loaded. And there's some like really obvious examples that are easy to sort. But you can get into some gray areas where people might debate about whether something even is controversial or not. For instance, if we're talking about climate change, for example, that you have the vast majority of scientists saying, yes, it's happening and we need to act on it like yesterday for sure, and it's human made and it's going to cause lots of problems. Then you have other folks who, especially in terms of elected officials, who say, this is just like normal cycles. It's not a problem. We don't really have to worry about it. It's not human created, or it's, like it's just kind of the natural way that things are unfolding. So that is an issue where there's controversy about whether even to call that a controversial issue, because when everyone who has any sort of professional expertise agrees and has consensus, for me, that closes it up. And for me, then people who disagree with experts who are knowledgeable, it's hard for me to understand why those are legitimate positions. But other people might say, no, those people can have a say, right? So sometimes what even counts as controversial can itself be controversial. There are 3 types of controversies. Again, we could spend way more time getting into this, but it's helpful to just have some clarity, because as you're working with kids, understanding the kinds of questions that you're posing to them, or helping them even understand the kind of questions they're asking you or asking each other, can be helpful. So there are factual controversies where people disagree about the facts of a case, definitional controversies where people disagree about the meaning or application of a term, and then values-based controversies where people just disagree. They have different priorities. They have different value systems, different beliefs, right? And those are like perpetual. They will always be open, controversial questions. And you've heard me use these terms a couple times already, open and closed questions. But open questions or open controversies are those where people in good faith with good evidence disagree. Or maybe there's just not enough evidence yet, right? Those are some examples. Closed controversies are those that are closed questions. Another way to say it are those where people who disagree are really disagreeing in very bad faith or have very, very bad evidence, right? So for example, a really basic one is, the question, did the Holocaust happen? There are people who don't think it did, right? You can find them online. That's bananas, right? Like there is no reason that I would include that particular perspective in my teaching because it's in bad faith with terrible evidence, right? So when we think about whether controversies are open or closed, we want to think about that quality of evidence. We also want to think about the ways that questions have open and closed in our history. So you have questions about who should vote, right? That's a question that's been open, that's been closed in the United States, that it should just be land-owning white men. Through social movements and activism, folks opened that question up. Then it closed back again on the other side to say, okay, more people can vote, right? That's opened back up, closed back up. Like that's just a controversy that keeps opening and closing about who should have the right to vote. And the role of education and the role of social movements are incredibly powerful in whether questions at a social level are open or closed. So examples of how this plays out. If we think about the topic of masks, a factual question could be, do masks help prevent the spread of disease? I would present that in my class as a closed question. Yes, like experts agree that it helps prevent the spread of disease. A definitional question is, what constitutes freedom? That you have people who don't wear masks saying it's because of freedom, their individual freedoms, that's why they're not wearing masks. You have people who are choosing to wear masks and saying, if we had required masking, that would allow people to move more freely. And so that's a freedom-based argument that I'm making. So these two sides with really opposite demands are marshaling the same concept, the same idea. And so which one is about freedom, right? That's an open question to me. That's one where I'd really want to explore different perspectives with kids. They could take a different position That's great. That's what we're learning about, right? Or a values question, should masks be mandated? That's also something that I would wrestle with as an open question, right? And there may be people who would opt to close those questions for different reasons. It's not necessarily that there's always one right or wrong answer. It's just a heuristic, like a framework to help us. If we think about the topic of slavery, lots of different questions we could ask, like, which of the US presidents fathered children with women they enslaved? That's actually an open question still, because people are collecting more facts, right? That there's more coming out, more information coming out all the time, more technology to be able to prove oral histories, either true or false, right? So that's actually a factual open question. Was slavery in the United States racist? Closed. Yes, it was, right? And for folks who claim otherwise, they are in bad faith or using really terrible information. Was slavery bad? Closed. Yes. And that might seem like this bonkers question, but Noreen and I have seen elementary teachers use assignments that say, give 3 good reasons for slavery, give 3 bad reasons for slavery. And that's not an anomaly. We've seen that pop up in lots of places. That's a teacher feeling pressured to present both sides no matter what, right? So what we're talking about is being able to frame a question as open or closed and understand why you would do that. You could flip these around. There's tons of questions you could ask of any topic, right? So a factual question that would actually be closed is, did Thomas Jefferson father children with Sally Hemings? Yes, that's actually been definitively proven. We know that that's true. It was an open question and now it is closed. Should we use the term plantation? That's what I would at least choose to present as an open question and explore different perspectives as to why people use the term plantation, why some people use the term slave labor camps. How should we even describe these places? Should the US government issue reparations for slavery? Also an open question with lots of different perspectives and people who are reasonable in good faith who have different positions and perspectives on that. So all students, absolutely, even the very youngest students, can and do and are totally capable of engaging in controversial conversations. Marie, do you want to say a little bit about this?
Sorry, I was reading the Q&A.
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the things we did another PD on Tuesday, and so now things are getting all students absolutely can handle these conversations, but particularly at the elementary level, it's the adults that are often often uncomfortable, often hesitant to do it. But kids want to engage in these things. Mm-hmm. And as we mentioned last time, they are often experiencing many of these issues within their families and communities, and they need someone to talk it through with. They want someone to offer them another perspective or give them an explanation that makes sense to them, or that they know that they can work with and work through. However, it's also important to remember that just because certain things are controversial to us, that doesn't mean that it's controversial to young people. And even more importantly, things that might be deeply controversial to them, we might think, what? That's not even like a thing. Why are we fighting over this? And Katie has a wonderful example of what that can look like.
Yeah, this actually comes straight from my now 5-year-old daughter and her friends when I asked them what was something they debate about. And it's Paw Patrol, a show I actually can't stand. There are so many good kids shows out there, and this one, for whatever reason, just cannot deal with it. But my daughter loves it. And it's these were questions. So she just turned 5, but I was helping her helping to explain these different categories. And she said, yeah, okay, well, here's a question. What's up with Ryder? Where's his family? Where does he get money for all of his gadgets? She has tons of questions about Ryder, which I think are totally fair, reasonable questions. Definitional, there are additional new characters that have been introduced in subsequent seasons. And so my nephew and my daughter were debating about whether this subsequent character Everest was part of the Paw Patrol, right? That was a question that they were wrestling with each other. And then who is the most important member of the Paw Patrol? There is intense debate among the 4- and 5-year-old set about this as well. So having them practice this, they were loving this conversation, and there were democratic skills and ways that they were learning to practice disagreeing, hearing each other, considering other perspectives that were incredibly valuable, right? So these are not controversies that I particularly care about, but it was great practice for them. We want to remind you too that there are lots of different ways that you can engage young people in these kinds of questions. And again, this is to prepare them for democracy, a democracy with lots of concerns and problems that we have to work together to solve, and that's part of the education that we've been framing out for you the last few weeks. So there is debate. That's when your goal is to make a stronger case to win an argument. That's one approach to take and to help kids practice and learn how to do. There is discussion, where the goal is to just simply understand each other and be able to say, like, I understand that this is what you think, and maybe you come to agree and maybe you don't, right? But you're really you're discussing to listen and to understand each other. And then deliberation, where the goal is to come to consensus on some sort of community decision, where you're having to really figure out, like, we need to make a decision together. So we have to compromise, we have to figure something out. Those are all really important. And so understanding, being very clear for yourself when you're presenting things as open or closed, and how you're practicing wrestling with open questions with students is really important. Again, all of this, I could go so much deeper in a day-long, if not longer, retreat. But we do encourage you to investigate some of these resources. I saw Noreen mentioned in the chat that Diana Hess is like the foremost scholar on controversial issues education. Her work is really fantastic. Look into that. Alyssa Hadley Dunn writes really powerfully and has great resources out there for teachers called Teaching on Days After, about helping students PK-12 process current events that are unfolding, that are intense and controversial, and ways to do that that are respectful, equitable, healthy, constructive. She's got fantastic resources. Reimagining Elementary Social Studies is a great edited volume that Noreen has written for. There's some really wonderful chapters there. And the Handbook on Teaching Social Issues by Ron Evans, edited. I have some pieces in that book. They're just really wonderful resources for teachers. And then Learning for Justice has great short articles, and we just pulled out a couple that are about this specifically, but there's some really, really great stuff out there. Okay, so that was our first tip, to just remember that this is about preparing kids for democracy, and that there are open questions where multiple positions and perspectives are great, and that's actually something we welcome and value. And so for some of those critics that are claiming indoctrination or claiming that this is like political, it's a good way to say, well, we live in a democracy, we need kids who can do this, and we are making space for lots of different perspectives, and we value every single kid in our class. Noreen, are you ready for tip 2?
I am.
Okay.
So as we alluded to earlier, center students' questions and concerns. And with the constraints that you have as elementary educators, this can be hard, but there are lots of opportunities for you to open up those spaces, whether it's a morning meeting or just having like a box of questions, like a question box, or a place where they can like put in little slips of paper where they write down the things that they're wondering about. And so to support you in that, there's a few different ways that people have been talking about for a long time, with lots of resources available behind them to help you take up this work. So the first one is engaging in inquiry. And this is an educational idea that is supported by all major professional organizations. Just a quick outline of what inquiry looks like. You as an educator will co-construct compelling questions. Those are like these big overarching questions that have many possible answers, as well as supporting questions that are kind of smaller answerable questions that scaffold that learning that will lead toward answers for that compelling question. So when you make those questions with students, rather than just giving them a question that you as an adult have created, they're much more engaged. And over the course of your unit, as they are learning what you are teaching, they're constantly coming back to those questions. And so it just makes the learning very focused. It's rich because there's not just one answer. And again, it's co-created. It isn't just you imposing a question and a series of learning tests upon them. Another piece of inquiry is applying interdisciplinary concepts and tools to help students answer their questions. So within the context of social studies, historians go about answering questions in ways that are different from geographers, who also understand the world and ways to find answers differently from economists or political scientists. Each one of those experts has a different set of tools and resources that they use. And so when you ask students to apply those different lenses, they're going to use different resources and come up with some different nuances that can help lead them to a wide set of answers. So thinking about ways that you can go beyond one particular discipline to think about how to find those answers is really important. And then a really important piece And I'm thinking about the Texas standards right now, because Texas elementary standards are very intense, and pretty much every other state standard I've seen in comparison is much simpler. But most states, if not all states, and certainly Texas at length, have standards related to research and having students do research using a range of resources and being able to summarize what they've learned, draw conclusions and make generalizations from what they've learned. And so you as an educator, when you're structuring an inquiry, need to be responsible for helping students understand what sources are reliable, how they can gather multiple reliable resources. Texas does not use the CCSS, Lisa. Nope, Texas is special. Texas has their own standards, the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. Yep. Texas does lots of things that the rest of the nation doesn't do. And so by helping them make sense of the different resources, primary sources, whatever it is that they're gathering, to kind of like verify them against each other. If you find two sources that basically contradict each other, what do? You keep looking. You look for explanations. You learn about where these sources came from. So helping them curate a set of tools to justify whatever those conclusions are that they're arriving at is really important. And then supporting students in making those evidence-based claims, but not stopping there. Now that they know this, what can they do? How can they take action? It's that piece around civics, because again, this is about being good democratic citizens. So how can they take action in ways that are meaningful, but also realistic for young people? So those are some like kind of a quick overview of the stages of inquiry. If you're interested in learning more within the context of social studies, the college career and civic life, or C3 framework gets into all of this in tremendous detail. You can find that online. And then there's lots of other resources for inquiry across other content areas too.
One thing I want to just point out really quick, sorry, Noreen, that even if the state standards aren't using CCSS, for instance, there are a couple of other states people are noting, most of the standards still have connections to inquiry, because this is every single professional organization, what they're advocating for across every single discipline based on a ton of research. So it's impossible to find a state that doesn't have something in their standards that relates to this, because this is the expectation of every single professional organization, that this is best practice and that this is what kids are engaged in. That's also great to make yourself familiar with, because that provides you language to help people that maybe don't understand, or it's different than how they grew up, as Noreen mentioned, and they don't understand why you're teaching this way. Those can be really useful resources to share, to say, look, this is my professional organization expects that I do this, and this is like cutting edge stuff. We don't use leeches anymore to like suck people's blood out, right? Like there are more sophisticated advanced medical tools, and we have the same kind of more sophisticated advanced educational tools. And this is just one example.
I can't believe you squeeze leeches in there, Katie, but you always amaze me. The next piece, and you know, this is something that the pre-service teachers I work with, like it just blows their minds, because they see a cute activity, they see a craft, they see a picture book, and they're like, ooh, I'm gonna teach that. We encourage them, and hopefully many of you are familiar with the notion of backwards design, where before you do anything else, as my friend Delandria Hall, Dr. Delandria Hall says, you begin with the end in mind. Before you figure out what you're going to use to teach children anything, you have to know what the learning objectives are. What is it that you want them to learn? What evidence will you have of that student learning? And then once you know those two things, then you can start to design those instructional activities. Then you can start to think about what picture books might be appropriate, what activities might be appropriate. But always begin with those learning objectives. And that's a process called backwards design. That image on the far right, Understanding by Design, is a very detailed book that walks you through that whole process. So if that's something that you and your school or your school district haven't used, I highly recommend it. And that book comes with tons of great worksheets and examples that, if you're new to it, really make clear how you walk through those 3 stages and the intentionality behind that in terms of what you need to teach, so that students can learn particular and very specific pieces of information, often in alignment with your state standards, right? So backwards design, if that's not something that you're already doing, is just showing a lot more intention in terms of what it is that you expect students to learn, so that you're not doing any fluff activities, but everything is deeply grounded in meaningful learning.
And it's not incompatible with inquiry. I think that's something that sometimes novice teachers can struggle with. But when you're saying like, what are those questions I want students to wrestle with? and maybe answer in different ways. That's okay. But what questions do I want them to wrestle with? What experiences do I need to give them so they can do that in really thoughtful ways? What information do they need to be able to come up with solid answers? Again, even if they're different than their peers or different than how I would answer it, that's what we're trying to figure out, is like, what do we want them to wrestle with? What do they need in order to do that thoughtfully and well? So these are they might on the surface seem like they're at odds, but they're actually really deeply compatible.
So as you start to think about what lesson planning might start to look like now that you've been thinking about the topics we've mentioned in the last 3 weeks, these are some guiding questions that I came across in a piece by Louise Derman Sparks and Julie Olson Edwards, who are leading experts in early childhood education, particularly around anti-bias education. So again, just trying to make sure that the education that we offer to our youngest learners represents our diverse democracy, period. So some of the questions that they listed that I thought would be really helpful for you all are, where do I best fit anti-bias goals and issues into my curriculum plans for the day and week? So they may not fit into every single thing that you're doing every single day, but where would they make sense? Who might be left out of this curriculum? How will I use the topic to include each child, connecting to the diversity of their social identities and to their individual needs? What ideas, misconceptions, and stereotypes might children have about this topic? How can I learn what these are and provide accurate information and counter misinformation and stereotypes? How can I use this topic to support and strengthen children's innate sense of justice? Because kids are very clear on what is fair and what is not fair. If you have not spent time with a toddler through 8-year-old, they know what's right. And they will argue with you if they see you doing something that they consider unjust. So if we know that they innately feel that way, how can we support and strengthen that and their capacity to change unfair situations to fair ones? Again, it's that notion of agency. Are we giving them opportunities to do what it is that we're asking them to understand? And then lastly, what learning materials do I need to gather to incorporate an anti-bias perspective into this curriculum topic? And we'll be sharing resources with you around these ideas for the rest of today. And we've already shared several earlier in today's presentation and in the previous 2 weeks.
This book is like an oldie but a goodie, and the NAEYC, the National Association for the Education of Young Children, has a documentary they just put out that is fantastic. It's available for free online. I cannot think of the name of it right now, but if you go to their website, you can find it, that walks through anti-bias education with young learners. That's really powerful and beautiful, and you get to hear from teachers, you get to watch them enacting this curriculum with young children. So honestly, some of the resources that are out there for young children right now are the most cutting edge, really great pieces. So this is a really good one.
Another piece that can be really helpful as you start to engage in this work is what Bree Pickor has described as 6 elements of social justice teaching. And there's a great graphic that Cheryl Davis created on the right there for you. Basically, she's got 6 elements that start off with just students loving themselves and who they are and learning about their own identities, then building to respect for others, then starting to understand issues of social injustice, then moving into social movements and social change over time, then awareness raising, and then again, that piece of social action. Now, one of the things that she says in a 2012 article that outlines each of these different elements is that teachers often stop at elements 1 and 2 because they're easy. They're not, you don't wade into potentially controversial territory. But if you're only focusing on self-love and knowledge and respecting others, you're not getting into social justice teaching. So if that's your goal, you got to go beyond that. And again, that's where sometimes there's discomfort. There's a lot of learning that needs to happen. There's a lot of self-reflection that needs to happen. But if you want to actually be about social justice teaching, you have to start exploring across all of these elements. I don't know, what is the best way for them to access the Pickor article? I will drop it in the chat. How's that? Once Katie moves on to the next step, I will drop it in the chat.
And if you go to usingtheirwords.org, the article is linked on that website.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Yeah, so that's
that is Bree Peckor's website, where she has tons of resources. She's worked with her undergraduate students to recommend children's literature and come up with all kinds of different related units about those 6 elements. So highly recommend her website, as well as that article that details some of the specifics for each of those elements. And then lastly, we just wanted to shout out a couple books that really help educators think about these issues more deeply. So Being the Change by Sarah Ahmed, Lessons and Strategies to Teach Social Comprehension, really hits on those notions of self-love and knowledge and respecting others. It has wonderful examples from her 4th grade classroom, so you can see how students have engaged in this work. There's worksheets that you can use. This is also something that I've used with my pre-service teachers, and they found it really meaningful and powerful. One of my favorite parts about this book is the section where she talks about impact versus intent, and how often we may not intend to slip up, misspeak, accidentally say something problematic, racist, hurtful, but we need to get over ourselves and focus on the impact on the other person rather than worrying about how we are feeling. And so if you have not read Being the Change, I highly recommend it. And I think it's a really powerful way to see how kids actually do engage in a lot of these conversations and can do it in really meaningful and important ways. Katie, you want to shout out Cultivating Genius?
Sure. I mean, I'd be surprised if folks haven't heard of this book, because I think most teachers I'm working with in elementary schools right now are all reading it and having book studies. But it also is great. It's not specific necessarily to any particular discipline, although it does use a lot of language arts and social studies, because those are kind of obvious places to do a lot of this teaching. But again, it's written by a longtime educator with tons of experience. It's written for teachers, so it's super accessible with tons of really practical ideas. And teachers are just raving and raving and raving about how much it's helping them rethink their practices and to do right by their students. It's great. I feel like we just did a reading rainbow. Do do do. Don't take my word for it.
Oh, this is me. Okay. Our next tip is invest in communication and relationships. And when I work with pre-service teachers, I spend a lot of time on this, because the best way to build relationships is to communicate with people and to also be really transparent about what you're doing with your students, with their families, and with your administration and your peers. Particularly for those of you who might be newer to the profession, your peers who have been around have a lot of understanding of both the context of your school as well as the families who attend it. And they may have background knowledge that you're not aware of and can really help inform the ways that you make decisions about your teaching. So if you're doing a lot of inquiry work and your curriculum is created and adjusted based on your students' questions, make sure that your students' families know that. Like, if the questions that you're talking about emerge from their children, they should know that, because perhaps those are things that the young people don't really feel comfortable saying at home or asking at home, or maybe they've tried and they just want to know more. So just be transparent about that. That being said, there's always going to be some people who want to find something to complain about. First and foremost, I always share this example about how I was teaching multiplication with 3-digit by 2-digit numbers. It was either when I was teaching 4th or 5th grade. And for those of y'all that have taught that skill, it's complicated and there's lots of steps. And the first few times you do it, students get confused, like with the place values and which ones do you multiply by the tens, and it's a lot. So I encouraged my students to use markers so that when they were multiplying the ones in the top digit by the ones place in the second digit, they could use like a red for that. And when they start multiplying by the tens digit, use a different color. And one parent lost their mind because I told their child to use colored markers or colored pencils to do their math homework. And they said, they wrote me a long letter, y'all. Back of the homework assignment, this poor student came and was like, I'm so sorry. And they handed me this paper that had the most belligerent note from a parent about how dare I assign math work in anything other than pencil. And I was like, I'm trying to build skills that demonstrate notions related to place value. And I know that's probably not the way that they were taught, right? Like, this is clearly someone who learned math in a very specific way and believed there was no way to do math with a tool other than a pencil. And they had some anger, and maybe that's where they decided to channel it that day. But some people will find something to get mad about, period. And you can't always make that your problem. But then there's also some people who will find something to complain about who have nothing to do with your community, your school, your students. If that's the case, sometimes that's just noise and we need to not listen to it. If it is your students' families, people in your community that have these concerns, then absolutely listen. If there is a change that you need to make, then do that and then keep doing your thing. again, communication and transparency is super important, and that builds that trust in those relationships that you need to be able to do this work effectively and over time, and in ways that keep you like nourished and not freaked out and stressed all the time. Now, like I mentioned when I was talking about impact versus intent, there may be times when harm happens in your classroom, from you, between students, perhaps from another teacher or adult in the building, students in another classroom, right? And so when that happens, it's important in doing work that is centered on equity and justice that we make space to address it and try to repair it. And when you as an educator cause harm, again, prioritize the impact of that harm rather than what you meant. What you meant doesn't even matter anymore because someone has been hurt by what you did. Now, apologize and try to do better. Like how can you repair that? And sometimes it isn't even just about the apology. It's about you changing your behaviors, about you teaching another lesson that corrects the misstep or the error that you made, right? So every single time it might look different, but prioritize that impact over the intention. And when people tell you how they're feeling, when someone tells you that they're harmed or they're hurt, just take that as a gift, because so often people keep that inside or they don't tell us and they tell somebody else. But when someone is brave enough to let you know that they've been upset by something that you or someone else did, that feedback is a gift. And we need to, like, societally just do a better job of being able to like listen, like actually listen to people when they express those concerns to us and try to just do better. Don't take it personally, and that's hard, but think about what you can do so that that harm doesn't happen again, and that what can you learn from this, and then move forward.
Sometimes I think even showing like appreciation and celebration of that feedback, especially from kids who have the courage to say, you pronounced my name wrong, or that's my religion and what you just said is actually not true, or, you know, that takes a lot of courage. And so to be able to say, oh, I'm so glad you said something, thank you so much, that's awesome, and not see it as disrespectful. And sometimes kids, because they are children, it may come out in ways that we deem to be disrespectful, and we have to stay focused on the nugget that they gave us, and maybe have a conversation about like the way that it was communicated, if that's warranted down the road, but to really focus on that. We're going to mention this book, Troublemakers by Carla Shalaby. That's just such a beautiful book about kids in school who have been identified as troublemakers as young children, like very young children. And the ways that instead of labeling them as troublemakers and seeing them as problems, seeing that as communication with us, as a way to share with us that something is not working for them, right? And I'm thinking back to my own practice, times when students, especially students with minoritized or marginalized identities that were different than mine, that I acted out of ignorance. I taught them in ways that hurt them. And as Noreen said, my intention did not matter. But because I cared for them and because I appreciated that, there are ways to respond to that feedback that actually build and strengthen the relationship and build trust with them and their families that are super, super important, right? This is also true with families that had different values than I did, right? And maybe were worried or uncomfortable about something, but we were in constant communication. They knew I loved their kid. They knew I would do right by their kid, right? Like that takes you so, so far. It won't take you everywhere with everyone, but it's how I sleep at night, right? Something else we really want to stress here is that the word consistently is italicized, that Noreen and I are not big fans of like writing a letter home to a parent because today we're going to talk about this, and it might be something that some people don't like us to talk about, right? To Noreen's point about the markers, like that would never have occurred to you, Noreen, to write a letter home about that. But it's this idea that if we pick and choose which topics are like sensitive, that in and of itself can be really harmful and hurtful to families that are like, well, that's me. I'm somehow like a hot topic, you know, that can be something that really alienates and marginalizes youth and their families. So to just think like every week I'm writing newsletters home, I'm talking about what we're doing. I'm not trying to pick out like the one or two things I think might be hot topics. And I'm in constant communication and conversation with families. So they know me, they know the relationship I have with their kids. They believe that I'm looking out for their kids' best interest, and I know that they are. We want to give this other tip too. This I think is probably my favorite one. Know yourself is the first part, to really have very, very, very clearly articulated in your mind, and to practice being able to talk about it, what it is that motivates and inspires you, what guides you. Some of this is deeply professional. Like, can you speak fluently? Can you communicate fluently about the research that's out there about best practices? But also, do you have deeply personal reasons why you're committed to what you're committed to, why you're doing this work, who you're obligated to? The more you practice that, even if it's weird to ask a friend, like pretend to be an angry parent and I'm going to role play and practice this, because the more you practice it, the more confident you're going to be and the easier it's going to be to not escalate or to not lose your cool or to get freaked out in those situations. So really having that very deep anchor. In the book Noreen and I wrote, we talk about it as your compass, knowing very clearly what your compass is. You also need to know what your red lines are. And this is definitely not something that we talked a lot about until the last couple of years, but knowing that there are threats to teachers' licenses, threats to their employment status, if they take a stand and say, I refuse to do this thing that the district or the school is asking me to do because I know it's going to hurt kids and I'm not going to do it. And sometimes taking that stand can put you in the line of fire. And so knowing very, very clearly for yourself, what are the lines that you refuse to cross? Do you have a backup plan and resources? Are you connected with other people, with other educators and families? Are you embedded with that so you know you wouldn't be standing all by yourself, or that you wouldn't be taking that position all by yourself? So really, really come to understand that. The caveat there too, I know we've been talking a lot about pushback against equity work in schools, but we cannot stress enough that for generations, there has been absolutely committed push for teachers to do right by kids, right? There are families who will be indebted and so grateful and so appreciative that you are doing this work for their kids, that we need to think about them too, right? Not just the parents that are going to be upset or are getting lots of misinformation or don't trust you for some reason, right? So think about that just all very clearly. And then the meta reflection question here about who we are and how that influences the way that we answer those questions. Being critically self-reflective as a teacher is incredibly important for a million reasons, but especially in the United States, in elementary schools, the demographics of who is becoming teachers does not, by and large, match the demographics of the kids that we're serving in a whole variety of ways, like religious, racial, ethnic, gender, right? So thinking about how we can be really thoughtful and critically self-reflective, who we are might present additional risks to us in this work, how it might create additional obligations for us in this work, and then thinking through the steps that your district or professional organization or those communities that you're involved in, what steps they can take to support and protect and defend you as you engage in work. You're putting together your case for why this makes sense professionally, why it makes sense ethically. But we know that sometimes, even if you have all of the reasons in the world to do it and it's very well grounded, that you still might be at risk for all sorts of actions. And I wish that wasn't the case, but we want to be realistic about that. Noreen, anything else about that?
No, we have a couple questions that are going to tie into this, so we'll just make sure that we hit on this.
Okay, great. And then know yourself has a second part, grow yourself. We could have a gajillion slides with all sorts of people that we recommend you reading or following or conferences to go to, but we just wanted to pull out a few that we think are really, really great. We already mentioned Troublemakers. The Education for Liberation Network has this wonderful planner for teachers, like a lesson book that's really great. They put it out every year. Rethinking Schools has fantastic articles written by teachers and a lot of edited books that compile those articles on all sorts of topics, but their Rethinking Elementary Education is fantastic. If you haven't checked that out, it's really a wonderful resource. There's lots of organizations that run workshops or have PD for teachers. Those are just two there at the bottom that we think are especially really good, but there are lots of ways to keep learning and growing. And Noreen and I have been in education, both of us, for over 20 years. We are super dedicated and committed to this. We've gotten terminal degrees in this to really push our knowledge. And even then, there's still so much we're learning about, so much that we're pushing ourselves on, sharing resources with each other all the time to just keep honing our skills and knowledge. It never ends. And that can be daunting sometimes, but it's part of why I absolutely love working in education, is that I get to always be learning myself. And my students challenge me and teach me all the time. There's just so so much out there. And really right now, there's some downsides to social media for sure, but being able to connect with folks, being able to get access to these resources, especially if you're in a district that isn't offering them at a district level, that you still can take advantage of those for sure. Right, and then the last tip we have, we wanted to end on a hopeful note. I've been feeling some like despair, general despair recently, but thinking about the importance of nurturing a radical imagination. This is circling back to that James Baldwin quote from 1963 that reminds us that these are old problems and that these forces of backlash and resistance are not surprising at all, right? This is absolutely what we should expect. But what we need to do is to just keep imagining that things could be better. You know, this might seem like kind of an obvious example, but for hundreds of years in the United States, it was illegal to teach enslaved people to read. And so to even imagine a world of schooling and education and literacy and being able to imagine that and will it into being and to take incredible risks to do that with children, that is part of this history that we are trying to bring forward and connect to, is to think about imagining how things could be better. Bettina Love, who wrote We Want to Do More Than Survive, talks about freedom dreaming a lot in that book. She also wrote this really wonderful article right at the start of the pandemic saying we can't go back to the way things were. This is an opportunity to reimagine what schools could be like for kids, what it could be like to teach, right? And we have to just keep asking why and asking why not constantly, right? We say in our book, harness your inner toddler and just keep asking why. There's so much we take for granted when we get socialized to become teachers, and they're just routines and kind of like even the doing of school that just seems like it must have always been that way. That's just how it is. Literally every single part of school has been constructed and has a history and was invented, and it can be something different, right? So dream big, and then dream big with your students, because they have, especially young children, have the most wild, incredible imaginations. They are totally unafraid to ask why things are the way they are, to point out like really obvious problems that we've just become so accustomed to and just think like, well, that's inevitable, that's how it is, that's how it has to be. They have these incredible hopes and dreams that it's our job to help nourish and to nurture and dream with them, right? And just remembering that if these generations of educators that have done so much to imagine something better for children, for all children, then we certainly can do that too, even amidst this fear and panic that is generating so much heat for teachers right now. We can do this. And we are carrying the torch forward from educators generations before us and passing it to the generations that come after us. All right. I just realized I didn't create a poll for this. I'm so sorry. That totally slipped my mind to do. So maybe just in the chat, if people want to put the number for the gift that they're thinking of, how you're feeling about taking this on. If you are a classroom teacher and you came to this to try to figure out how to do a better job of that, how are you feeling about this work right now? Noreen's gift game is strong, I have to say.
I'm not seeing any number 4s. Yes, I was very
Number 1 that I love for. I don't know if you saw that one. That was my favorite one. This is great.
I'm not seeing a lot of 6s or any. Oh, I got one. I got a couple 6s.
There were a couple 6s, but not too many. So yeah.
All right. We'll give folks a few more seconds. You hear the thumping above my head? Can you hear that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do.
I don't know what that is.
All right. All right. This is great. Okay, so what we also would like you to do, we know that there are already a few questions sitting in the Q&A, but we really would love, this is your chance to ask us, and we won't be able to get to everybody's questions for sure. We just, for the sake of time, but we do want to make sure that if folks have questions, and what we're first going to be looking for are themes, like questions that are popping up in multiple ways or that we know based on our answer are actually questions that are connected together. But we'll just sit quietly. I don't have any elevator music to put on. I can serenade us. Nobody wants that, but.
Well, before we do that, Katie, do you want to go to the next slide?
Oh, sure. So
I know there were some questions.
Yeah, put your questions into the Q&A, not the chat, because it's hard for us to keep up with the chat. But we do have a discount code, and someone actually asked about that earlier in this session. Do you want to shout this out? I feel like you're better at logistics than I am.
For sure. So you can buy our book, Social Studies for a Better World, from which most of what we've talked about the last 3 weeks comes from. So a lot of our content from session 1 was from chapters 3 and 4 of the book. A lot of the content from session 2 was from chapters 5 and 6. And then a lot of what we talked about today is from chapters 7 and 8. You can buy the book anywhere you buy books, but if you order it directly from the publisher, Norton, and you enter the code that you see on your screen, that will give you a 20% discount. Now, I know some folks have talked about doing bulk orders, and if you email Norton, I think it's like, there's like a contact us button somewhere on their website, and let them know you want to order more than 10 books, you get a 33% bulk discount. So if you plan on ordering these for your team, your school, a professional development, take advantage of that bulk discount from the publisher if you order directly from them.
That's great.
Okay. And I think the next slide is Q&A, right?
Yeah,
So,
I'm going to leave this up so people have it in case they need to jot anything down.
And Katie, some of the questions in the Q&A are very specific to you and some of the things that you've mentioned already. So do you want to take a look at that and see if there's anything you want to start with?
Yes. So the different types of controversies, I see that one, and then Annie, I see yours, and I'll answer that one next too. There are a lot of white female teachers. That is absolutely right. So the question about how we handle controversies we deem as closed, but our students believe are still open. This is like honestly a huge can of worms to open, but in a very, very small nutshell, one way to do it is to just pose that question to students. Like, how should we handle this question in class? Let's make whether to deem it controversial itself an open question and try to explore the different perspectives and hear why people might want to present it as open and present it as closed. That in and of itself can be instructive. If you are super committed and you're like, yeah, I'm not comfortable even opening it up, and there are many reasonable, very good reasons for doing that. There are also some bad reasons for doing that we wouldn't get behind. But if there are a good set of reasons, you at that point would want to just communicate with families and to talk about, here's why we're doing this. Here's the information that we're going to be looking into. Here are the spaces that will be open for multiple perspectives and different takes. And here's why we're closing this particular part of it. That again isn't going to necessarily resolve any tensions, but it will for some people. And that's honestly, those are two of the ways that you could handle that. And then I'll just follow up here with this idea of being a white female teacher, what drives me. I'm going to try to not talk too long about this, but for me, it's about learning a lot about that specific identity, that history, like the history of white women in the United States specifically is not a great one. And so I feel super obligated to be part of disrupting these systems of oppression that in many ways have structurally advantaged me and my family, whether that's because my family were pioneers and they settled Iowa and they were the recipients of a lot of really racist policies and the displacement of Native people. So it's incumbent upon me, because I have inherited that, to learn as much as I can and do as much as I can to disrupt that. I also just think my own humanity is wrapped up in it, that I want to be part of a community that is deeply anti-oppressive. I think that's better for everyone. So that's something that drives me. I want a better world for my kids too. And just a lot of humility, I guess, just thinking that there's so much that I have to learn and ways that I don't want to contribute to these longstanding problems. And as conscious and aware and deliberate as I can be about that, I want to be. I'm not sure, honestly. I bet I've answered that in a more powerful way in other settings, but I think it's an important question, and I'm glad, Annie, that you're thinking about it. I hope others are thinking about that too. Noreen, anything that you want to say on that point?
About why white teachers do the right
Hey,
thing.
white ladies.
No, I have no comments.
Dear white ladies, stop doing a lot of things. Start doing a lot of things. Yeah, so there's that. Oh, and I see a really quick one. I'm going to click on the thank you page just because our Twitter handles are there. And then we both have websites. That's another way to get in touch with us. Gloria just posted that. Yeah, so I'm going to put that up here. What other questions, Noreen, did you see that people are posting?
There's a couple related to privilege. I'm not sure if you wanted to address those kind of like from the work that you've done with ELI, if that makes sense. I'll give you a minute to read through those. For folks that are looking to build community, we did want to mention that we've created a Social Studies for a Better World Facebook group. If you don't teach social studies, that's okay, you can still join. So anyone who was a part of this webinar who wants to authentically and meaningfully engage in this in the future, please let us know. And it is a private group, but you can see it's like visible to the public because there are trolls and people out there who intend to bully and be mean and not actually help children become citizens in our democracy. So it is a private group just to make sure that we're protecting each other and making it a space where folks are able to be, supported and be vulnerable about what they're working with. So that's one place where we're hoping to build community. As we've mentioned, our website, www.ssfabw.com, or Safabwa, as we like to pronounce it, .com, has all of our book recs and lots of other resources that we've been sharing. I will make sure this weekend that if there's anything that we haven't put on there that we mentioned, that it goes up there. That way everything is all in one place for y'all. And we are both on Twitter, and that's probably the easiest way to communicate with us. We get lots of emails, and so Twitter is sometimes an easier place to just check in and see how folks are doing. Okay, so Katie, anything that you want to address first?
Yeah, I do want to say one more thing though about Annie's question, that when you are structurally advantaged in some way, or you have like protections based on your identities, that obligates you to take greater risks, right? And sometimes I think we have a sense that that I'm way further out on the branch than I actually am. Like I might have walked out like a step or two and it starts to feel a little wobbly. And so I think I'm like a huge renegade when really I have like another 10 feet that I could walk. So for me, like whiteness is obvious here, but I also think about like my cisness or my straightness. Like there are things that I can say and do that colleagues of mine who don't have those identities are at such an incredible risk for saying and doing that we know are actually completely good practices with kids, right? That they shouldn't be controversial practices. But for those colleagues who have to take enormous risk and put themselves up for a lot of intense hate and scrutiny and bigotry directed at them, that makes it even more important for me to be willing to put myself out there in those ways, because it's going to take a lot more for me to have those kinds of risks or consequences that I face. So this isn't just necessarily even with kids, it's just thinking about like being a good colleague even to your colleagues that you have, but definitely working with kids and families too. So just for whatever that's worth. Yeah, there are definitely questions that are more like general equity and education questions, not specific to like anti-oppressive education elementary. So it's not that I don't want to get into them. I just think there are tons of other resources out there that will do much more justice to these questions that are really, really good questions. Just this first one, however, that was posted about the ways that words matter, which I agree, and I try to be really careful about that. But yeah, tolerance is a great example, because there was an organization called Teaching Tolerance that just went through a massive overhaul in their organization and renamed themselves Learning for Justice because of this connotation with the word tolerance as implying like I'm holding my nose and I'm just like, dealing with you. There's something about that word that implies like I'm tolerating you and I have the power to tolerate you, which I think is why they ended up changing to learning for justice, because justice doesn't have that meaning or connotation at all. And privilege also, this is a big area of my research, is with students who are white and wealthy. Honestly, that's probably the easiest way to say it. And so I've used the language of privilege in some of my work. I don't love it. It's hard to find other words that do a better job. I think whoever posted this talking about advantage and structural advantage is another way towards that. Privilege implies like fortune or luck, and having that associated with like really incredibly harmful systems of oppression feels weird. Like that feels like a weird way to frame it. So protected, those kinds of words imply more of what I think is actually happening. I agree that the word privilege isn't quite right either. Noreen, any thoughts about those words or other words like that are kind of on your radar to be especially thoughtful about?
I mean, I think that's where just having conversations about power and oppression can be really useful. And yeah, tolerance, I'm not a fan of. I've never been a fan of tolerance. And then similarly, like some people like to get into the difference between kindness and niceness. Ultimately, I think we need to be able to have mutual respect for each other, and all these other terms and words that people use are kind of dancing around that. Like, especially in elementary classrooms, you see a lot of stuff around like being kind or choose kindness. If you're at a school that where everyone read Wonder, right? Like that was a big like buzz phrase thing. So I just feel like we need to move away from these things that aren't actually addressing the issue, and the issue is who is being marginalized and oppressed, who is not being treated as a full citizen in our spaces, whether it's the classroom space or the community space, and why is that? So sometimes I think we spend too much time on these words that are not actually addressing the issue at hand.
Mm-hmm. There's a scholar whose work I really love named Zeus Leonardo, and he talks about the problem with this word privilege and that it implies like people are just walking along and then luck just happens to them. And Noreen, it's making me think about your what you were talking about last week, like the passive voice and active voice when you were going through the children's lit, and just being very deliberate about what is actually happening and just naming what is actually happening. So thank you. I just happened to see a question that just popped up here at the bottom. Kathleen is frustrated with books that are easier to read, especially as a special education teacher, but they're oversimplifying historical themes to the point that stories become more blatantly racist or good guys versus bad guys. And that's something that Noreen and I like are constantly shaking our fists at too, that that's another critique that we didn't mention tonight, but it's one we talked a little bit about last week with the pedestals, that we're not interested in like knocking some people off a pedestal and putting other people now on it. And now we all worship and adore these people, right? It's about making things complex and complicated and nuanced and contextualized and understanding those complications. On our website, ssfabw.com, safabwa.com. It does not roll off the tongue as much as we might want it to. That we have pulled a bunch of children's lit around themes that are commonly taught in elementary schools that we think are really, really great. And you'll remember that we're reluctant to like give our stamp of approval on a particular curriculum or even a particular book because it depends on how you use it, right? But the books that we have on that site are books that are really beautiful and are easy to use in really thoughtful, wonderful ways. They make it really, really easy. I don't know, Noreen, if there's like specific books you want to shout out there, but I'm thinking like upper elementary, the History Smashers series is really great. That's for older kids and more advanced readers, but it's really good.
Yeah, that's a favorite for sure. I will say it's coming out in the fall, so it's not out yet, but the National Council for the Social Studies has done a collaboration with the Library of Congress, and they will be publishing a book that has like one whole book is elementary, and then there's a separate book that's secondary, and it teaches different historical moments and topics through primary sources, which I think gets at some of that like grittier reality. In some of the chapters are about things like American Simple, so it's kind of more like standard content. But those will be a phenomenal resource when they come out in the fall, and those are also going to be free. So when those come out, we will put those on the website, because that's one way to address some of those historical moments that often get like the very superficial happy ending, like you said, that kind of like that dichotomy between the good guys and the bad guys. Like there was no middle ground, no one switched sides, no one thought about their stance as a bad guy and was like, oh, I'm gonna go over here to this other team, right? Like people learned, people changed, people sometimes did things that weren't in their best interest because they were in alignment with another group because it was profitable for them, right? Like it was complicated. And so a lot of picture books can't capture all that. And if they tried to capture all of that, it wouldn't really be a particularly engaging picture book. And it would definitely exceed the 39 pages or whatever the maximum number of pages is for a picture book. So one of the things that we mentioned last week that I'll just remind y'all is using primary sources is a super powerful way to add those extra details and nuances. And we can both read with texts as well as against them, and just ask questions about what perspectives are centered and what perspectives are missing. I can look for the link real quick, Katie, if you want to take another question. But the Children's Literature Assembly has a phenomenal position statement about the use and selection of diverse children's literature. And in that document, so like if you want to kind of diversify the book selections that are used in your grade level team, on your campus, to your librarian, like whoever you want to present your case to, that document is a really great outline of why it matters to use more diverse books, and also being really intentional about which books you select and how you have those conversations with students. And that document has a list of questions for teachers to think about as they're making those selections, and also a list of questions that teachers and educators can ask as they are reading those books to young children, so they can think about what is being centered and what is being left out. How are you like these characters? How are you different, right? And so I'll look for that link because I think that's a super useful tool.
Great. There's at least a couple questions left that we haven't gotten to yet. And Jim is asking one about being a dad of a white boy in school, and that his son is starting to feel like angry about how some of these activities are framing him or how it's being taught. It's so hard, Jim, to know what's happening. And I'm really sorry that your son is feeling that way. I think what Noreen and I are hopefully conveying is that it is essential to talk about systems of oppression and privileging or advantage or whatever word we want to use, right? To talk about systems of oppression with all kids and to help them understand how they're situated and how that obligates them, and that there's nothing imminent about it, right? Like, I'm white and I can choose not to perpetuate white supremacy and whiteness, right? And I really appreciate learning about other white people who have done that, because that helps me learn about the kind of white person that I want to be. I don't need to feel bad about being white. I do need to feel bad about being a jerk, and I do need to feel bad about perpetuating white supremacy, right? If that's something I'm engaged in, but I don't need to feel bad about being white. And I don't know if this is what's happening. Someone else had asked about like a privilege walk, or there are these other kinds of like, I don't know, like common activities or things that sort of float around. And there are ways to do those poorly that just end up like not helping the situation at all. So the point is, again, to have teachers that are robustly prepared to have complicated, tough conversations, and to be able to hold kids in this space to learn about systems that they're nested in without that becoming like a personal attack on them, right? Or without creating space for kids to like turn on somebody else. And so when we keep stressing over and over and over again, building community, building relationships, knowing your content backwards and forwards, like that's all really important. I think I have time to tell a quick story and then to try to answer Lisa's question. Rain, I don't know if you have an answer to this, but the third grade class that I was co-teaching in a couple of years ago, we were working through categories of advantage and disadvantage. So we were looking at different kinds of oppression connected to that, like ableism, linguism, ageism, and the kids had so many stories to share. They just didn't know the academic vocabulary, but they were living these things. They had so much knowledge about it, right? So we were more just teaching them the academic vocabulary and then helping them to think about how they identify and what that means, right? So there was one little boy in the class who was great, just a really cool kid. And he filled out his form, and I'll never forget it. He looked up and like put his hands on his desk. He said, he's like, this isn't right. He was like really moved by the fact that when he could identify with every piece that like everything was structurally advantaging him in every possible way. And he was like, whoa, okay, whoa. Like he just needed to think about it. He didn't feel bad about it. Other kids weren't like blaming him for stuff that's not his fault because he's a third grader, right? It was about him starting to think about the systems that he is immersed in and the community that surrounds him. And the teacher was like, what do you think? He's like, I've got a lot of responsibility. That's a huge insight for a third grader to take away. It was really powerful. And he was a leader in the class. Kids looked up to him. He was really charismatic. And he was like, okay, I got to think about like what this means for me to make sure I'm not going to hurt people. Right. So it was a beautiful moment that was really only possible because of the community that teacher had built and all of the learning the kids had been doing before that moment. Right. So it's not okay that you could have situations where kids are feeling like, so you don't belong in class because your identity is connected to these things. Everyone belongs in class, right? So our goal is to try to prepare teachers and educate them and equip them to do this in really healthy, constructive, powerful ways. Maureen, any thoughts about that, or want to take on the last question in the last minute we have here?
Can you remind me what was the picture on that chart that had rocket boosters?
Oh yeah. So this class was so amazing, but they had decided they needed a class illustrator to help kids that were struggling to read. So this one kid was so great and really wanted to illustrate everything. So that kid became class illustrator. And on this chart, drew when they were like, how can I illustrate structural advantage? And this kid was like, I got it. Drew a person in roller skates with rocket blaster boosters coming off the back of the skates. And they said, this, like, the person might be working really hard to roller skate, but they have rocket booster skates on. So even if they're working hard, they're still like going way faster than everybody else. And I just thought, yeah, that's it. And an 8-year-old just understood that and communicated that and like figured that out in a picture that they shared with the rest of the class, right? They're geniuses. They're amazing. And that activity and that learning for those kids was incredibly bonding and incredibly rich for them. And that's the kind of education that we want all kids to have, that all kids deserve to have. And
I think that's it.
Yeah, I'm so sorry, Lisa. I think that's like also a question for another set of workshops. Hopefully today helped you say like, yeah, curriculum matters. And this is part of your job as teachers. That's part of what you all do. We're so grateful to everybody for their time tonight, for these last 3 weeks, especially. We really, really appreciate people reaching out and talking about how they're already using what we're teaching about. So thank you. It's really, really helpful. And we're glad to be with you all. Have a good night.
All right, per usual, we're going to wait until they kick us out. That's how we roll. We go till the very end. And we're going to see. 88% of you believe she's full of shit when that 8-year-old said, I've got all the power and that's wrong. 88% of you think they're full of shit. I think they're full of shit too.
Kids, Black and brown kids especially, are feeling like deeply marginalized and uncomfortable like every single day. And that point is so important. And there's a difference between white kids feeling uncomfortable learning about racism, but still feel like they belong. That's what we want, right? Like that's productive discomfort. That's generative discomfort. Yeah. And to be honest, sometimes there are teachers that I think it would be a fair assessment to say that they're ostracizing a kid. It's very rare, honestly. Sometimes that is like a kid is interpreting it that way because that's how they're processing the discomfort that they're feeling. And so to anticipate that and to help support kids like who aren't familiar with being uncomfortable, that's a really important piece of this too, is anticipating that and then helping support kids in like, okay, this is going to feel like a lot, for the kids that don't have, unfortunately, like the kinds of experiences that Pat noted in the chat, like a daily experience with not feeling that sense of belonging or discomfort. So I really appreciate, Pat, if you're still listening, thank you for that.
Thanks, everyone. Lots of great resources shared, lots of wonderful comments. Thank you for all this time that you've spent with us. And we hope that we see you in the Facebook group, on Twitter, and in the future, and who knows where. But let's keep the conversations going. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, I think you can end the recording now.
Okay, great.
We're staying till the bitter end.
The share. There's too much going on between Q&A and chat, and like things kept popping up that I didn't even know what they were with the live transcription app.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. Okay, and now I'm trying to stop the recording and see what happens. There we go. Okay, great.
Alrighty, you go do your thing. I'll mark up
Thank
later.
you. That sounds good. Really good to see you too tonight. Okay. Have a good one. Bye.
All right. That's all she wrote, folks. We've done 3 sessions, and again, I'm actually pretty appreciative that they allowed us to record these. I'm virtually positive that they knew who I was. I'm virtually positive they knew. And the reason I say that is because you guys know how I typed into the chat earlier that I did not ask a question. That was a lie. I did ask a question, and they didn't answer it. And the question that I asked them was, can you give us a definition of critical race theory just in case like parents ask us about it? And what they did when I asked them to give me a definition of critical race theory, I pulled it up, hang on, is they did not answer the question live because I think that they knew that it was coming from the person that was filming them. And they sent me this Learning for Justice article, what critical race theory is and what it means for teachers. And education law and policy expert Bob Kim answers some questions for educators about these so-called anti-critical race theory laws from August 23rd. And so we've got their definition of what that means. Maybe we'll even take a quick look at that. But what did you guys think? I want to start off with just a general kind of reaction from the chat. We watched 3 weeks. I definitely think I am grateful to them that they, again, let us stream this webinar because I'm pretty sure they knew who I was and I'm pretty sure they knew not to address me publicly, but they allowed me to stream this. They knew I was streaming it. They didn't say anything this time. They said something last time. Both of them have me blocked on Twitter, but both of their accounts are also private. At least right now, their accounts are privates. Now, of course, I have like 8 bajillion burner accounts, so I will get access to their accounts at some point. But right now, both their accounts are private, and both of them have me blocked on Twitter. But what did people think? I thought that of the 3 sessions, this was easily the most eventful session that we watched. It is extremely clear to me that they have no idea who we are or what we think. It is extremely clear that they blatantly were trying to cut off debate. So they said questions like whether or not America is a fundamentally racist country is a closed question. It is a closed question. We've already proven it. It is not up for debate. Well, no, that's not true. It's not true. Actually, it is a fundamentally racist question within, or a fundamentally racist country within their political ideology. But for people who are not a part of their political ideology, it is actually not a closed question whether or not America is a country that was built on racism. That is not a closed question. And so when they were teaching that part about, there's open questions and there's closed questions, like, no, the things that they said were closed questions were not closed questions. It just happened to be a political opinion. The other thing was about, do masks prevent the spread of the virus? Well, at one time, the CDC may have considered that a closed question, but now the CDC considers that to be an open question. I'm not expressing an opinion here, YouTube. I am expressing what the CDC is telling us, which is that Masks do not prevent the spread of the virus. That is from the CDC. That is not from me. Check with the CDC websites for all related information and to make all your decisions about the CDC. Remember, guys, the CDC is our God. That has not changed. But that's not a closed question. The CDC is releasing new data and new evidence about that. So no, that is fundamentally not a closed question at all. Let me see. Just go back to the chat. I want to display some reactions. Deborah says were very elitist about their education and the cash that gives them. I totally agree. Listen, man, anyone can get a PhD. I say that as someone with a PhD. Anyone can get a PhD. It involves reading a lot of studies. It involves doing research. It involves learning how to do research. You have to learn how to do statistics. You have to just read mountains and mountains and mountains and mountains of academic papers. You have to be able to synthesize primary sources. But anyone can get a PhD. And I do not believe that a expensive piece of paper with doctor on it says it doesn't make you smarter or more capable than anyone else. And I say that as someone with one of those fancy pieces of paper. So that was it was very off-putting to me how much they were like, we have been educated and we know and we have been educated, and those silly parents, they have not been educated. They just went through school and they just think about their experiences in the school, but we are the educated ones. That was really, really kind of really condescending to me, to be honest. Let me see. Sam says lots of logical inconsistencies and glossing past obvious indoctrination versus education. I absolutely agree with that. World Slugger says, I appreciate their intent to teach nuance and objective facts, but abhor pulling identity into literally everything they teach. Like I said, and I maintain this position, this is not the worst series of webinars that we've seen. We have watched many worse things than this. It's not the worst thing we've ever seen. They're not bad people. I think Katie is a useful idiot, and what I mean by that is I think that she has not thought through the logical. That's not to say she's stupid. I don't think she's stupid. I think that she has not thought through the logical and conclusions of what she's teaching. Noreen, I don't know. Noreen seems to have that anger that I always associate with social justice warriors, and I think she knows what she's doing. But the white one, I don't think that she's a bad person. I think that she just hasn't thought it through. Let's see. Savritz, thank you for the super chat. Placebo mask, a security blanket for the psyche. It is a security blanket, but of course we're checking with the CDC for all of that information because I am not an expert at all. Patrice says, my impression is that Katie feels really bad about things and she can't control and she didn't do, and she's trying to create activists to solve her misplaced guilt. I completely agree with you, Patrice. I think that Katie was probably indoctrinated in the education system, just like the children that she is now trying to indoctrinate. And I think it's really sad. She doesn't seem like a bad person. The other one, man, she's got some anger issues. She really does. She's got some anger issues. She needs to go to therapy or something. She needs to cry it out. She needs to find a good person she can talk to. She needs to maybe start smoking weed. I don't know. But she needs to work on that anger. That's going to come back to bite her. But Katie, I don't think was a bad person. The white, I don't think she's like a bad person at all. I think that she's just confused. Let me see. Sam says, are 5-year-olds cognitively capable of nuance and understanding and debating second and third order effects? My claim is no. I also thought it was interesting, Sam, that they were talking about teaching 5 to 10-year-olds with primary sources. Listen, man, I've adjuncted college classes. Like, I'm not just saying this as someone who's never taught before. I have taught. I was an adjunct for years, and I refuse to adjunct anymore, at least for the moment, because college students do not understand primary sources. And you're going to tell me a 5-year-old's going to understand primary sources? Please. No, that is not correct. A 5-year-old will not understand primary sources. So let's just take a quick look at this article, which is what they sent me when I asked them to define critical race theory. Let's see how they defined critical race theory, just as like a nice little to wrap all this up. Educators around the nation are grappling with so-called anti-critical race theory laws that are cropping up across the nation. What is critical race theory? Now, before I read their definition, I'm going to give you my definition. Critical race theory is an ideology that started in academia in the 70s that says racism exists everywhere, in every person, in everything, in every interaction, and that the job of the critical theorist is to explore how, not if, how racism occurred, because one of the fundamental grounding principles of critical race theory is that racism is always assumed to have occurred. James Lindsay defines critical race theory as the belief, as in religion, a religious type belief, that racism is the fundamental organizing principle of society. Now let's see how they defined critical race theory. Critical race theory is a school of thought that explores and critiques American history, society, and institutions of power, including government and legal systems, from a race-based perspective. I don't disagree with that. An intellectual outcropping of critical legal studies and feminist legal theory movements of the 1970s. Ding, 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 we agree on that. The critical race theory movement has contributed to a deeper understanding of how race has been constructed in and impacted the United States. No, I don't think we agree on that. It poses key questions such as, has the American legal system and traditional civil rights litigation been effective at achieving racial justice? And if not, what should be done about that? So in this part, they're being sneaky. They're using weasel words in that last part. What they're saying there is that racism exists everywhere, in every person, in everything, in every interaction. And the job of the critical theorist is to explore how, not if, how racism occurs in any circumstance, because racism is always assumed to have occurred. So we're kind of giving the same definition, except they're using weasel words, and I'm telling you what they actually mean by it. What are anti-CRT laws? As of July 2021, 26 states have proposed legislation or executive actions banning or limiting the teaching of principles attributed to critical race theory in school. To be clear, these proposals don't have all that much to do with critical race theory. That's not true. Wrong, wrong, wrong. So far, the bills have been signed into law in 6 states: Idaho, Iowa, and New Hampshire. Oklahoma, Tennessee, and Texas, and 4 other states, Florida, Georgia, Montana, and Utah, have issued executive rules or memos with similar purpose. While the proposals vary in scope and content, one common goal is to discourage or prohibit staff teaching, training, and/or curriculum and instruction in public K-12 and/or post-secondary schools. Anytime you hear public schools, I need you to think government, they are the state, that stereotypes, scapegoats, or causes discomfort or guilt among members of a particular race or sex by suggesting they are responsible for racism, sexism, or are inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive. Some proposals prohibit additional actions, such as promoting or advocating the violent overthrow of the U.S. government, promoting division or resentment of people of different races or classes, and even suggesting the advent of slavery in the territory is now the United States constituted the true founding of the United States. Now, if they actually included that in most anti-CRT bills, that would actually eliminate many of the arguments that they're making about America being a fundamentally racist country. Where many of the anti-CRT bills go wrong, including in New Hampshire, is that they do not prohibit teaching America is a fundamentally racist country. If teachers can teach that America is a fundamentally racist country, that is all they need to teach your little darlings equity. That is it. That is it. And that is a shortcoming of many of the anti-CRT laws that have been passed. Hey, Christian, I hear you're doing a stream with the Queen from England. Tell him I said hi. Where did this anti-CRT movement come from? Many anti-CRT bills contain provisions similar to those found in documents issued by the former Trump administration. In September 2022, the Trump administration issued a memo to federal agencies directing them to identify and cancel any staff training programs that focus on critical race theory or white privilege. Blah, blah, blah. We already know this. We already know that Trump banned that shit. And then Biden immediately reversed that on day one. And now we are in a position of having to defend it against it again. Are anti-CRT laws legal? That's a good question. States do have the broad discretion to control the content of classroom discretion or school employee trainings. Yes, they are legal, but they can't enact laws with discriminatory purpose. Not a single anti-CRT law that I've seen has discriminatory purpose, so that is incorrect. Laws can't be so vague that it is impossible for educators or state-funded contractors or trainers to decipher what's allowable or not allowable. Most of the laws that I've seen are very crystal clear. In fact, they have crystal clear lists of definitions. and laws that are unduly restrict academic freedom or the ability of students to receive a diverse range of ideas and information ideas may violate the First Amendment. No, 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 no. Wrong. Wrong. Blatantly wrong. The Supreme Court has already ruled on this. When public school teachers are acting as public school teachers in the classroom, they do not have free speech. This has already been ruled on by the Supreme Court. This article lies, and that article was just lifted up as the example that we should look to by the webinar that we just watched. That is that sentence that I have highlighted is completely and totally incorrect. Not right. Wrong. Already been ruled on by the Supreme Court. Remember also, public school educators enjoy free speech protections. Oh, nope. No, they don't. When they choose to speak out on issues of racism, sexism, and matters of public concern in their personal capacities. Oh, isn't this funny? So the author of this article is actually acknowledging that public school educators only have free speech protections when they are speaking in a personal capacity, i.e., not when they are standing in the front of a classroom educating your little darlings on the way of the world. So no, public school so this makes this even more nefarious. Like, this article is a great example of the weasel words that they use to try to get around this stuff, because the author of this article obviously understands that public school teachers do not have free speech protections when they're acting as public school teachers, because he has enumerated that public school educators only enjoy free speech protections when they're acting in their personal capacity, i.e., on their own time. They're being so sneaky in this article, aren't they? That said, in our highly connected world, even personal speech may impact the school community. In general, for public school educators, the more unconnected to work your speech is, as indicated by what, where, when, and whom, and how you communicate, the greater your right to speak freely. Government employees do have there's also an acknowledgement that teachers are government employees. That's good. Government employees do have a right to speak out at work. No, they don't. Not in the classroom. No. But this right is more limited than when they are speaking in their personal capacities. So at least there's some acknowledgement there. What can I do to address anti-CRT laws? These so-called anti-CRT laws are creatures of state legislators and governors. If you are experiencing a problem or unnecessary restriction related to your job, report it to your local and state elected officials and your union representative if you have one. That's your right. You may also wish to pay a visit to the civil rights advocacy organization Defending Free Speech or Educators' Rights. As a former ACLU attorney, I always appreciated calls from, oh, he's a former ACLU attorney. That explains everything, doesn't it? It does. It does. All right. So we know that this is a weaselly article that's using weasel words to try to get around what they're really doing. I mean, my God, of course. All right, guys. Well, that is all we have for Spy Stream tonight. I hope you enjoyed it. Please take a moment to mount that like button on your way out the door. Now, as a reminder, tomorrow we will not be on my main channel. We will be on my second channel on YouTube. If you are watching on Odyssey, Rockfin, Rumble, or Getter, I will be streaming in the same place. I don't have multiple channels on any of those platforms because it's just too much stuff, man. But I do have multiple channels on YouTube to protect against stupid strikes or things like that I might get. So I do happy hours on Friday on my second channel, Actively Unwoke. We will be gathering at 5 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow to watch this webinar that was just done yesterday. This is a brand new, right off the shelf webinar from the U.S. Department of Education called Supporting Transgender and Non-Binary Students in K through 12 Schools. U.S. Department of Education. So we're going to hear exactly what the Biden administration is doing and thinking and wants teachers to do in those public schools. And we're going to be doing that at 5 p.m. tomorrow on youtube.com/activelyunwoke. So please make sure you subscribe over there if you have not already. And of course, if you would like to support the work I'm doing, I would invite you to become a member of my Locals community. Locals is the best place on the internet. We do 2 Zoom calls every single week. We have Bitchcraft, we have book club. It is also the entry point to the Unwoke Army, which is the team of people that I am working with to create a grassroots bad news bears effort to fight back. We are not well-funded activists. We are just average people like you that don't believe that journalists are doing a good job, and we're going to pick up the slack and do it for them. We donate our time freely. We donate our energy freely. That includes me as well. But the way you get access to that is by becoming a member of my Locals community, and this helps support the work I'm doing because I am a full-time unwoke activist. This is what I do. I live this stuff. I breathe this stuff. I have to spend all sorts of time understanding this stuff, looking for stuff for us to watch, stuff like that, doing videos and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you appreciate it and you want to support the work I'm doing, head over to kb.locals.com/support. And you can become a member in my community for $5 a month. You can become a member for $50 a year, which gives you 2 months for free. You can also make a one-time gift if you just want to show your love, which I greatly appreciate. And just in case you can't afford the $5, listen, I don't want to make the Unwoke Army. It's not about money. It's not. It's simply about you being able to come to my community Zoom so I can talk to you in person. Community Zooms are private. They are unrecorded. I want to make sure you're not crazy before I invite you to join the Unwoke Army. If you really can't handle the $5 a month, just use the promo code UNWOKE. Hit apply. That's going to give you a free month because I don't want money to be an excuse for anyone. Okay. If you want to be part of the Unwoke Army, I want you to be a part of it, but you need to come to the community Zooms. We do them on Mondays at 7 p.m. and we do them on Wednesdays at noon. You can come to book club. You can come to Bitchcraft. You can come to any of our open Zoom calls just because I need to get to know you. I cannot emphasize this enough. My Unwoke Army, which is again a ragtag group of people that are just committed to fighting back. Everyone's doing it on a volunteer basis. We have a private Discord server that we work out of. We're starting to do really great work, especially around the Burlington schools. We've got some other projects going on too. I want to emphasize that I want as many people to be involved as want to be involved, but what I will not allow is disruptors in this group. I will not allow people who are more interested in bickering and drama simply because I have to deal with too many people in the supposed anti-CRT community, especially on Twitter, that are only interested in bullshit and drama and not actually interested in doing anything to fight back. So I do screen the group. I do make sure that only the best people get invited to the group, and that's how you get involved. Also, I would love it if you could pre-order my book, Actively Unwoke, The Ultimate Guide for Fighting Back Against Woke Insanity in Your Life. It is available for pre-order right now on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, Simon & Schuster's website. You can get the audiobook on Audible. There's a hardcover version. There's a Kindle version. Google around your local booksellers. We'll be selling it as well. We're going to get autographed copies up and available soon, so that's going to be available. I'm also going to give, if you've already pre-ordered, I'm going to give a way to get an autographed book plate to put in your book. And hopefully I can see some of you guys in person too and sign your books in person. I'm really looking forward to that. But this is the ultimate guide for fighting back. It is the only book about this subject on the market that actually gives actionable ideas, actionable case studies, real world things that anyone can do. I wanted it to be a highly practical book, but I want to make fighting back against the woke fun. I want us to help achieve things in the real world. I want us to make progress, and I want us to have a really great time doing it. So that's Actively Unwoke. You can pre-order right now on Amazon, or if you want to look at some other places that are not Amazon, head over to activelyunwoke.com, and that will give you some great options. All right, guys, I will be live tomorrow at 5 p.m. on my second channel, youtube.com/activelyunwoke. Please mount that like button on your way out the door. Please make sure you're subscribed to the channel if you're not already. Thank you for spending some time with me tonight. Take care. We'll see you soon.